In 2010, BioWare followed up the release of Dragon Age Origins and their subsequent conquest of the world with Mass Effect 2. If we'd thought BioWare were the studio with the golden gun before now, this was another bullseye for them. Widely considered to be the best game in the series, and using its story of recruiting what is effectively Mass Effect's Suicide Squad to put their expertly written characters and amazing world building front and center once again, Mass Effect 2 reached critical acclaim far greater than its predecessor and outsold it by a significant amount. And with the first whispers of Dragon Age 2 in the air not long after its release, we were all waiting for them to deliver exactly the same quality there. Unfortunately, that's not exactly how it panned out. In 2010, I was living in Birmingham and working almost full-time in a bar/nightclub to barely afford to pay rent on a fairly basic, lice-infested apartment that was a reasonable walking distance from the city centre. My now ex-wife had lost her job prior to us moving out there, and I was basically providing for both of us on a minimum wage, 0-hour contract job. The recession caused by the housing bubble popping was still in full swing, and I also had a bank loan over my head that had been taken out to help pay for the wedding at the time when we were both gainfully employed. So the prospects for a guy who went to university with absolutely no prestige, studied to be an ESL teacher so he could live overseas, did the bare minimum to scrape a pass, and then decided to throw all that out to be with someone who didn't even want to live overseas, were pretty bleak at best. I'd promised myself as far back as high school that I wasn't going to spend 5 days a week going to a job that I hated and gave me no satisfaction just so I could afford to enjoy my weekends. And now, that was all that seemed to be available to me. I'm not for a second saying that I'm blameless. I had made my bed and I was lying in it, but that didn't make my future seem in any way more hopeful. As with all less than stellar jobs and situations though, it's the people you're going through it with that can make you look back on even those darker moments with something like nostalgia. I had some great co-workers at that place, including an overweight chain smoker with a heart of gold who I couldn't stop yapping about Smallville with, and a black tank of a man with braids who loved heavy metal and RPGs. During our respective Origins playthroughs, not a shift would go by where we weren't updating each other on the various choices we'd made and the shenanigans we'd pulled, and the same went for Mass Effect 2. We were both also very excited about the rumblings of Bethesda's latest Elder Scrolls game, and its apparent focus on dragon slaying. For all the problems there were in the world, we had our stories, our games. We had BioWare. And it never really registered with me at the time just how quickly BioWare got from Origins to the sequel. Having lived through the PlayStation 1 and 2 eras, 18-month to 2-year turnarounds on game series entries just felt normal to me. While, even at this time, the wild world of the internet was highlighting the abusive conditions under which our games got made, it wasn't as front and center as it is these days, with publishers not even trying to hide that they treat their developers like toilet paper. Even so, Dragon Age 2 was a game I was excited for from the moment I saw that trailer, which I think we can all agree is pretty badass, even now. And it was a game that I bought and installed on my PC the moment my paycheck came through. Debts and necessities be damned. Suffice to say though, I was underwhelmed at the time. Having gone on an epic adventure across Ferelden, taking on the setting's unique Darkspawn enemies, and then travelling the Milky Way recruiting badasses for a super dangerous mission in Mass Effect 2, I was confused, to put it mildly, about many of Dragon Age 2's creative decisions. And it was very obvious that far from being the sequel the first game had deserved, this one had been made on the cheap to cash in on the first surprise success as quickly as possible. I wasn't exactly opposed to spending more time in a single city this time, but the same locations were being reused over and over. Not getting to make my own character grated on me, and what the hell did they do to the combat? Where are the tactics, the strategy? Why am I constantly being ambushed and never doing the ambushing? What's with this reject from My Chemical Romance, and why is the woman from Torchwood here? I had a lot of issues, and while I certainly remember enjoying some things, 2 things in particular I might add, I never actually finished the game. I gave up sometime just before or after the Arishok fight. It's weird, I don't remember the battle, but I do remember Zevran showing up for his cameo. Maybe I caught that in a YouTube video. My primary issue had been how blatantly dungeon maps were reused in different locations, with a few passages closed off here and there to limit your access. but like, I can see it on the map here, so who are you trying to fool? These kinds of games, however, are some of my favourites to return to. The disappointing sequel that may have been judged a little better if its older sibling wasn't casting such a long shadow over it. You know, the Deus Ex Invisible Wars, your Blood Omen 2s, your Dawn of Dreams and Devil May Cry 2. Actually no, that one is just a massive trash fire of a game. And having finally finished the damn thing with all its faults and frustrations, I can honestly say that I had a great time. It's not perfect, it's definitely not on a level with Origins, but Dragon Age 2 is much better than I remember. And if you're willing to gather around and lend me your ears, I'd like to try and convince some of you guys to give it a second chance too. Don't forget to do the engagement stuff to help the video if you please. Okay guys, shots at the ready. Drink every time you see Varric's chest hair. It's time to become the champion of Kirkwall. My usual research process when trying to uncover the creation of a particular game is to start with Wikipedia. From there, I dive into the references and very often spend time on the Internet Archive, looking through old articles and interviews from around the game's release. I'm not interested so much in what the reporters said as what the developers are actually quoted as saying. However, with Dragon Age 2 being such a polarizing entry, and the circumstances under which it was made now being very public, major players have come forward years later, after they've escaped from under EA's thumb, to talk about how Dragon Age 2 happened, the good and the bad that came out of it, and what they might do differently if they had to do it all again. Dragon Age 2 is the result of 14 to 16 months worth of crunch at the studio. If you're wondering how a studio went from dedicating 6 years to its ultimate callback game, to cranking out its sequel in a fraction of the time, well, I've got two of the most disgusting letters in the industry to point my finger at. Yep, it is, finally, time for the EA bad rant. Well, it's gonna be kinda ranty. Like, more than 50% ranty. Well, maybe a little less. Electronic Arts are a publisher run by people who don't have any passion for video games or any respect for art or the creative process. While Wikipedia describes them as a video game company, they are little more than a corporate entity designed to create imaginary wealth in the form of shareholder value through the exploitation of game studios, artists, and most importantly, the people who want to enjoy their work, aka gamers. This is no more obvious than in their EA Sports division, where they've been able to get away with releasing player roster updates and texture upgrades for the same price as a brand new full-price title with a new number on it for years. And more importantly, these games hit a much wider audience than most games do. These low-effort, high-profit products created an annual release schedule of guaranteed moneymakers for the publisher, and things only got better for them when consoles started being packaged with hard drives, games started requiring an internet connection, and DLC, microtransactions, and later loot boxes could be added into these games in order to generate a constant stream of revenue. As the money goes up, the company gets bigger, and it absorbs developers who make all kinds of interesting games. But EA doesn't want their devs working on niche genre works of art that are going to win Game of the Year. They want all their studios to make FIFA money. They want them churning out games and sequels every year like a factory, and they want broad mainstream appeal for everything. And if they can get battle passes and gambling in there, oh, sorry, it's not gambling. Well, what is it then?
Surprise mechanics.
Yeah, fuck you. I was recently introduced to the term gun and ball gamer, and I'm aware that it's used in a somewhat derogatory fashion. In this case, however, I'm using it purely as a descriptor for people who only buy a couple of games a year. These are the latest iteration of their favourite version of kick the ball and shoot the man. Now, anyone is welcome to play whatever games they want and enjoy them however they want, provided they aren't cheating online. I'm simply pointing out that these games attract a much bigger audience than other genres, as they attract not only gun and ball gamers specifically, but also gamers who enjoy other genres as well. So while a CRPG fan may want to shoot the man sometimes, shoot the man players rarely, if ever, want a good CRPG to play. But this is the audience EA wants to hit with everything, despite the fact that it's simply impossible. They started with sports, and somehow managed to make it work with Battlefield, and they expect their studios in general to be hitting the same kinds of sales figures regardless of genres, and these days they also want a constant revenue stream, to the point that CEO Android Wilson had the audacity to try and convince us that single players were dead and actually, no, gamers really want always online slop. How'd that work out for Anthem? So keep this attempt at a business model in mind as we discuss this now debt-ridden exploitation factory and how they went about dealing with a company that was used to taking their time to make masterpieces of video game art. Director Mark Dara now has a YouTube channel where he talks quite openly about his time in the industry and with BioWare. He sets the scene as such. Dragon Age Origins released in 2009, and Mass Effect 2 shipped in January of 2010. Then, in March of 2010, Dragon Age Awakening shipped. You'd think EA would be happy with this kind of output. Both Origins and Mass Effect 2 were massive critical and commercial successes that won BioWare and in turn EA brand recognition, fan loyalty, and plenty of money on top of that. Surely a happy investor would be willing to give its star RPG studio enough breathing room to do their next big sequel well and keep all that goodwill from the customers coming their way. But no. You see, BioWare's other big project at the time was Star Wars: The Old Republic. In the 2010s, the words live service weren't as ingrained in the collective consciousness as they are now. Instead we had MMORPGs. In 2004, World of Warcraft popularized the genre in a way that even Final Fantasy XI hadn't been able to. Blizzard were literally living beneath a mountain of gold for the sheer volume of people they had buying their game, and then continuing to pay for it every month. And every publisher was looking upon that mountain with green-eyed envy and asking themselves, how can I get me a mountain just like that? This led to an endless chain of short-lived, gimmicky WoW clones flooding the market, rapidly pivoting to a free-to-play model before finally being swept under the table for the next sad attempt at trying to steal a piece of Blizzard's pie. Hell, even Shenmue was threatening to try it at one point. BioWare were thrust into this madness with the production of Star Wars: The Old Republic Online. It was a solid idea. People like Star Wars, people like Knights of the Old Republic, and people like World of Warcraft. So just reskin WoW with Star Wars, throw in the BioWare writing and setting, and profit. However, developing a large online multiplayer game that is ideally going to have thousands of people from all over the world connected to it 24 hours, 7 days a week is a hell of a task, and the game had multiple delays. And when it got delayed again in early 2010, while the Dragon Age team was still working on Awakening, EA told BioWare they didn't want a revenue gap, and that they were going to have to kick out something for the fiscal year. Mark Dara basically says that Dragon Age decided to jump on that grenade and make a game that would make up the perceived revenue loss for Old Republic coming out late. And I'm sure you can all agree that this is an absolutely sane and normal way to have artists create something that people will want to actually buy. So if you've played this game and have strong opinions about its quality compared to the first, we can lay the majority of the blame here. But if living through the PlayStation 1 and 2 era of games has taught us anything, it's that restrictions force innovation. And so while this tight deadline did damage the project in many ways, it is in other ways also responsible for some of its better features too. In David Gaider's own words concerning the story, the thing about first drafts is that they can feel really raw. They've got a lot of bad in them, sure, a lot of rough edges. You start sanding down those edges, and that can be a good thing, but you also sand down some of the good edges as well. So you find a lot of raw storytelling in Dragon Age 2 that you don't find elsewhere. The larger narrative for the original Dragon Age 2 was already very much taking shape in David Gaider's head. It concerned an elf named Solus who might not be exactly what he claims to be. However, that story wasn't one that he could cut down into a game that could be developed in just over a year. And so a narrative that connected the events of the first and what would become the third game was conceived. There were other problems though. Origins players had just done a nation-spanning adventure tackling a potential world-ending threat. It was a common theme for BioWare games at the time. But how do you top that? How do you make the stakes high enough for your returning players to become invested again? You can't just have the Darkspawn come back with Blight 2 Electric Boogaloo. That would undermine everything that had been achieved in the first game, and be a bit boring to say the least. Also, they certainly didn't have time to develop a game with that level of scope. Their solution to this problem was in many ways the route that Max Payne took. After Max went from taking down street-level thugs to unraveling a conspiracy involving people at the highest levels of power, and taking down the head of a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical company, Remedy and Sam Lake then told a smaller, more focused, character-driven narrative, primarily about Max dealing with the trauma he'd endured from losing everything that ever mattered in his life, and then killing the population of a small country to get justice. And it was a more intimate, character-focused story that seemed like the best fit for a game being made under these circumstances. It was a combination of Gaider and director Mike Laidlaw who came up with the idea of a story told over time rather than distance. Laidlaw had the idea of doing what Silicon Knights had done with Eternal Darkness, and reusing level spaces by having the player return to them in different time periods. And this gave Gaider and his writing team a chance to craft stories that progressed over the span of about 7 years. The thing that really tied all this together though was the idea of a framed narrative. That is to say, a story being told by someone after it's all finished, which in turn prompted the need for a teller of stories. And that's how we got one of Dragon Age's most memorable characters. In this 2011 interview with GameSpot, a much younger Mike Laidlaw talks about the game's reactivity, something that was really important, and that we'll dive into as we explore the story ourselves. At the start of the game, what we are experiencing is the legend of the Champion of Kirkwall, this super powerful, cocky, brash badass who could charm dragons from the sky. Once all the bluster is out of the way though, just like in Patrick Rothfuss's excellent The Name of the Wind, we get to sit down and hear the real story of who Hawke actually was. This is the part where the player really takes control, and their actions in the game can even affect what Varric says about them in the brief narration moments. Another area to address was the combat. Laidlaw says in numerous interviews that he wanted a more immediate responsive combat system. Thanks to word of mouth and a console release, Origins had reached a wider audience than the hardcore CRPG crowd, and while the response there had been positive, feedback suggested that a large percentage of players didn't actually get past the opening hours. While the deep tactical combat of the original was one of its crowning points for many, it was also a deal breaker for others, especially on consoles. When interviewed for the official PlayStation blog on the topic, Mike had this to say: "What Origins delivered at its peak was a sense of a team working together, controlling 4 characters at once, progressing these characters, and building strategies. Where I think it fell down, more so for consoles than for PC, was the sense of immediacy. On a console, when you have a controller in your hand, your brain enters a space where, I have a sword, I pressed X, and I swung it. Okay, there, finally. I think the lack of immediacy and the lack of responsiveness was kind of the disassociation that console players had." Robin Thurberge, developmental manager on the project, described the new system as thinking like a general, but fighting like a Spartan. In her interview, she talked very optimistically about how they tried to balance the game and appeal to core players as well as more casual fans. As she says, "We want to sell video games. We want to appeal to as many people as possible." And I want to be clear that that's not a bad thing. Of course a studio wants its games to be successful. Of course they want people who've never touched an RPG in their life to finally try one and fall in love with it. And of course they want the financial benefit from that, so they can keep on making awesome games. Not every indie metal band who signs with a big label is selling out and giving up on their fans. They just want other people to enjoy their music as well. But as I mentioned with Mass Effect in the first video, trying to combine genres and hit two audiences is a hell of a gamble. If you don't get the balance just right, then each side will feel that their half is too diluted by the other. Also, Dragon Age Origins was a callback game. It was a thank you for getting us here to all the Baldur's Gate fans, so it's not exactly surprising that those same fans felt snubbed by the changes. While demos at conventions produced some positive feedback, the release ultimately fell short of expectations, by quite a lot. In a 2018 interview with Eurogamer, Laidlaw recounts a lot of his time at BioWare, and the aftermath of the Dragon Age 2 launch was a hell of a moment for him. He'd just suffered through the most intense crunch of his life to keep EA's shareholders happy, and now the community was reacting in a perfectly normal and rational way to a disappointing sequel. No, I'm just kidding, of course they were calling for blood and trying to get people fired. You know, because a game not being as good as you want it to be is definitely some kind of personal attack against you personally. Both David Gader and Mike Laidlaw look back on Dragon Age 2 with a mixture of pride and regret. For Gader, the story was something they'd never tried with a BioWare RPG before, and he still considers it some of his best character writing today. Laidlaw is very proud of many of the things the team achieved with the game, especially considering their circumstances. Hindsight is 2020, of course, and it's easy for both these guys to say, well, if I had to do it all again, I'd do it this way, and it'd be much better. But as Gader pointed out earlier, sanding down the rough edges can take away some of the good ones too. Time has been kind to Dragon Age 2 though. Many people, including myself who weren't so into it when it came out, have returned to it with a clear head later, and found that for all its flaws and frustrations, there's actually a lot to love in there. So why don't we roll up a character ourselves and start exploring it? Dragon Age 2 doesn't mess around with its introduction and wastes no time shoving you into the action, albeit in a somewhat subversive way. Rather than going through a detailed character creation process at the start, we get to choose one of 6 pre-made protagonists. These are either a male or female, warrior, rogue, or mage. So it is at least a little in keeping with the original game there. It begins in a dark place, a place of stone, iron, and flame. Not a friendly place at all. This aura of hostility is further punctuated by the images of shadowy figures dragging a helpless captive through drafty halls. A prisoner who's a little on the short side. Maybe not for a dwarf. They demonstrate their care for his well-being by tossing him carelessly into a stone chair with very little padding. And while our captive dwarf has at least one quip in him, he's soon confronted by the artist's very specific fetish. I mean by an overbearing female presence who introduces herself as...
I am Cassandra Pentagust, Seeker of the Chantry.
She's looking for someone she refers to as the champion, and when our dwarf demonstrates a lack of respect for her authority, she lets him know that she's not here to mess around.
You know exactly why I'm here!
And so we begin our tale, or rather, we get into the combat tutorial. We open on some kind of wasteland littered with corpses, and see 2 imposing figures making short work of Darkspawn. One is the character we chose at the start, and the other is a warrior clad in the garb of a Grey Warden. These 2 are brothers, who've run into a band of scouts that herald the coming of the Horde. With battle inevitable, they choose their ground to stand and fight, and get to work. Returning players should feel right at home here, as while there are some minor changes to the UI, it's all laid out in, more or less, the same way it was in the first game. You've got your hotbar across the bottom with all your available skills, and your health and mana stats are here. Targeting enemies and using powers is a matter of a couple of clicks, and tapping the spacebar pauses the action and allows the player to get a better read on the fight and make informed decisions about what to do next. In theory, anyway. I have to say that seeing Hawk do Mage Fu with his staff rather than what we got in the first game is very cool, and the faster pace of things does get the blood pumping. All these enemies have almost no HP though, and it's very clear that we're not in any actual danger in this part of the game. We are introduced to the new dialogue system next. Rather than actually getting to read our lines prior to choosing them, responses have been reduced to a Mass Effect style wheel that lets you choose between good, bad, and snarky. You get a vague idea of what the character will say for each choice, but not the actual line. And so, with some absolutely terrible dialogue,
shall I give them a taste of my blade?
The next wave of enemies charges in, and we have a little more freedom to experiment with our skills. Things go from bad to worse though, when our heroes go from dealing more damage to the Horde than the entire combined might of Ferelden did at Denerim, to facing off against first a charging ogre, and then the dragon arrives. It's at about this point that Cassandra tells her captive to quit telling country-sized porky pies. She's not interested in hearing tall tales that impress drunken dock workers in a stinking inn after a day of hard labour. She wants to know the real story of the champion of Kirkwall, because she's hoping it'll help her to find him. A dwarf takes this opportunity to shoot a little barb at his captor, pointing out that the Chantry has fallen to pieces, lost all of their authority, and now the world stands on the brink of war, and she's hoping Hawk will help her put it all back together again. It would seem quite a lot has happened since I was named the hero of Ferelden. God damn it guys, I leave you alone for a year and a half and you make a mess of everything again. And so with all the fluff swept aside, the dwarf agrees to tell the real story from the very beginning, and that's when we get to make our own character. While we've already picked our class for the game, this section is where we get to craft our looks. And I spent 0 time on the looks menu, as I wanted to look like the guy from the trailer, and frankly, that just saved me a lot of time. As we've already talked about, time constraints played a big part in many of the decisions that were made for Dragon Age 2. Letting players create their own custom champion from one of the many races in Thedas and give them a unique origin story was very much off the table. But telling everyone that they were Hawk, a human guy or gal with a fixed background, and even a family, opened up an entirely different kind of storytelling. Once the face sculpting is out of the way, that's basically it. The skill system from the first game no longer exists. You aren't going to be filling your inventory up with crafting resources and using them to mix up potions or traps out in the field like you did in Origins. That's all handled through specialists in the marketplace. There's no charisma or persuasion stat either to open up more dialogue options, and lockpicking is just tied to your rogue's cunning stat. There's no pickpocketing in this game, but that's okay. Crime in the first game was almost never acknowledged. I walked into many a house and home from the lowest beggar to the highest lord, and swiped everything that wasn't nailed down, while guards and residents looked on without a word. And I only used pickpocketing a few times overall, so it wasn't a big loss for me. As for character stats and talents, you'll get access to a starting loadout based on your class, and that's it. One thing you can do here though is access your Origin save game, and use that to set certain flags in this game. It won't affect many things, but there are a few callbacks, and those moments can be different, depending on certain things you did or did not do in Origins. If you don't have a save game, you can just choose one of several pre-baked worlds. And so after naming my character Adan again, no big deal, everyone is going to call him Hawk anyway, I clicked the start button and got on to asking all those important questions of, who am I? What am I doing here? And when am I getting my next cup of coffee? With character generation taken care of, it's time to move into a much more grounded version of the story. One that starts, just like Dragon Age Origins, with the massacre at Ostagar. The wasteland that we see in the previous story is in fact the ruins of Lotharine. Yep, this is what the Horde did to it after we rushed off to the Circle Tower. Our characters are not legendary heroes spouting cringy one-liners and laughing in the face of death, but a family of farmers who waited too long to make their escape and wound up overrun by the Darkspawn. Fortunately, they've got 2 apostate mages in their number, and Carver is a veteran of Ostagar, so even if he didn't know much about killing Darkspawn a week ago, he had to get good fast. Bringing up the rear is the family mother, and she's barely keeping pace with the rest due to her age. The family isn't exactly playing nice either. The kids are bickering and asking, are we there yet? And while Carver just wants to be anywhere that's not here, the question of where are we running to also gets brought up. Since everything they had in Lothering is now ash, their long-term survival prospects are pretty low. It's here that Mother Dearest chimes in with Kirkwall as a possible destination, though her daughter points out that there are a lot of Templars there. Not a good place for an apostate mage, that's for sure. It seems, however, that they've got both family and an estate there, so it's better than a refugee camp in Denerim. Not a bad idea considering what happened to Denerim. We have our first encounter of note, when we find a female soldier with a kind of Celtic vibe to her, and a wounded Templar, cornered by Darkspawn and barely holding back their advance. As an apostate, it might be an overall wiser choice to leave a Templar to his fate, but as human beings, well, maybe we can do better, and show him that there's more to mages than what his order indoctrinates him with. These guys are Wesley and Aveline. Aveline is a soldier in the King's army, and Wesley is her husband. Just like Carver, Aveline survived Ostagar, fled through the Qunari wilds back to Lotharine, where her husband found her, though not before he suffered a debilitating wound to his sword arm. Hope he doesn't use that for other things. You know. Wesley isn't exactly going to abandon his duty as a Templar, but with some advice from Aveline, he's practical enough to accept the help of a couple of apostates to escape the more immediate Darkspawn threat. So now we have a full party, and it's time to fight. A lot of Darkspawn. This makes narrative sense, as we've seen just how vast the Horde is in the previous game, but it doesn't exactly help with the game's first impressions. There's tons of these trash tier mobs, and even though we now have a full party, there isn't exactly much we can do. Maybe this is better for people who didn't come over from the first game. As I pointed out in the Origins video, in the Qunari Wilds, which is where we get our first taste of full party combat, you don't really need to do a lot of micromanaging of your party, and you don't exactly have a lot of combat talents to use to make strategies with. But still, this section does feel more like watching the gameplay itself than actually playing the game. As the escape becomes more desperate though, that's when the ogre from the previous story shows up, and the real version of how that went down isn't even remotely like Varric's tall tale. Oh damn, that's harsh. So we make a stand against the ogre and his many allies, and after barely pulling through, Hawk's mother is now grief-stricken for the loss of her little girl in such a brutal way. She even chastises her son for it, saying it was his fault and that he shouldn't have let her charge off like that. There's some baggage in this family, isn't there? We commend Bethany to the Maker and try to make a final escape, and just when it seems like we're going to be overwhelmed, I was actually expecting Cassandra to cut in here and tell Varric to stop exaggerating again. After all, who ever heard of a dragon anywhere near the Qunari Wilds, let alone Lothering? Well, we have. We know exactly who that is. And after she's done taking care of the vermin, Captain Catherine Janeway herself, aka Flemeth, assumes her true form and... damn, the lady is looking good for her age. So, you may be interested in making any more daughters anytime soon? Flemeth isn't exactly here for altruistic reasons either. She isn't just dropping out of the sky to hand out rescues to every straggler escaping the blight. No, she saw a mage slay a darkspawn ogre and sensed an opportunity there. After briefly introducing herself and inquiring as to the family's destination, she agrees to help them in exchange for a service on her behalf. She simply wants them to take a trinket to the Dalish elves near Kirkwall and do what their keeper tells them to do with it. The lady has places to be and people to fight very soon, so can't quite make the trip herself. Before the deal is struck though, there's just the issue of Wesley. His open wound has been bathed in darkspawn blood many times over, and the taint is now working its way into him. This is going to be a slow and painful death, which means someone needs to put him out of his misery. I couldn't put that on Aveline's shoulders, and instead decided to hold the knife myself. Wesley thanked me for my kindness, and possibly, entered the Beyond with a higher opinion of at least one mage. This concludes the first half of the prologue and the combat tutorial. We aren't quite set up to really dive into the game yet, but we're about to change gears and location in a big way. What I like about this section though, is it shows the very real suffering that was born out of Loghain's treachery at Ostagar. Of course, it's unlikely that Cailan and his army would have truly beaten back the Blight there, but if the army had held and been able to make a more strategic retreat, villages like Lothlorien could have been evacuated in an orderly fashion, so many more lives might have been spared. Out here in the Blasted Lands, we see a mother lose her daughter to a truly brutal attack, and watch a wife lose her husband to a sickness so vile that a knife to the heart is preferable to holding out. All this so that Loghain can make up elaborate stories about Orlesian spies masquerading as Grey Wardens, trying to deceive the king into handing over his country, while he maneuvers himself into a position of absolute power. The hubris of the powerful is always paid for with the blood and suffering of those beneath them. Now, I will say that it's hard to care too much about Bethany's death. This is a problem David Gator talks about when writing a family into a game. You can't just say, this is your character's family, you should care about them, and expect players to go along with it. Also, we really hadn't had time to get to know anyone before things started to roll downhill fast. Overall though, despite a few complaints, this is a solid start. It certainly grabs the player by the balls and squeezes hard. The second half of the prologue has a slower pace, and is mostly about the other half of Dragon Age. Talking to people. Kirkwall was once a stronghold of the Tevinter Imperium. Its primary function was to house slaves who worked the pits and quarries in the surrounding area. Packed into a refugee ship and sailing for days in great discomfort, the family finally lay eyes upon the gallows. This was once the prison that held the massive workforce of slaves, but is now the fortress of the Templars and the home of the Mage's Circle. The Templars are very powerful here, and we soon hear that Knight Commander Meredith is both respected and feared. While she officially has no political power, her Templars rival the city guards in strength, and crossing her is, generally, considered unwise. This doesn't seem like a good place for an apostate mage, that's for sure. The refugees escape their ships, only to be denied any chance of salvation at the gates. Whatever charity the city extended to people fleeing the Blight at one point has long since dried up. And I sort of get it. This is still a fantasy setting, which makes it a medieval one. Magic is powerful, but it's feared. So it's not like the mages are creating bountiful harvests by conjuring rain or using their powers of freezing to store and maintain food supplies. At the end of it all, there is a hard limit on space, food, and work. Then again, on the other hand, we've already seen the difference in wealth between the upper and lower classes, and I'd wager that just a few of those nobles could part with a fraction of their fortunes to help people desperately fleeing Darkspawn and not notice it. Maybe they just buy one new pair of shoes this month rather than two. If they want to be selfish about it, they could consider it an investment in goodwill and good publicity. After all, one day, they might be the ones fleeing for their lives from monstrous horrors and in need of help from a neighbour. However you want to look at it, Kirkwall is closed to Ferelden refugees, leaving many trapped at the gates without money to pay for passage elsewhere, or a place to shelter in or around the city. The guards aren't exactly sympathetic either, but when you've got people literally drawing steel on you just for carrying out your orders, it can be easy to see why their patience might have worn a little thin. When Hawke's attempts to reach his Uncle Gamlin lead him smack into the middle of a battle with angry deserters, we once again leap into action and use a lot of magic, all things considered. I mean, I can't see any Templars around, but this is their fortress after all. Our intervention here leads to the guard on duty agreeing to go and bring Uncle Gamlin to meet us. And while it does take 3 days, he finally shows up. Unfortunately for us, this is going to be anything but a happy family reunion. Hawke and his family soon discover that Gamlin lost the family fortune, sold the estate, and now lives in Lowtown. In order to get the family into the city, bribes need to be paid, and the cost has skyrocketed since the city was declared closed. However, Gamlin believes he's found two employers willing to front the cash to get them into the city, providing they spend the next year working the debt off. The options are a smuggler or a mercenary band. Sounds like a great deal. There's something like an interview and an audition process for each of these respectable organizations, and once the deal is signed and sealed, it's time to end our prologue and move time forward a year to where Hawk first meets Varric, and where the adventure really begins. Tackling Dragon Age 2's narrative is challenging to say the least. We can't just take a tour of Ferelden, talk about the places and cultures we find there, and analyse the people we meet along the way like we did in Origins. Dragon Age 2 is a game that takes place over time and deals with key moments in the life of the protagonist that transform them from a refugee from Ferelden into the champion of Kirkwall, and places them square at the centre of the events that seemingly weakened the Chantry and pushed all of Thedas to the brink of war. At each of these points, we have to deal with fairly complex character relationships. Sometimes doing right by your friends in this game means saving them from themselves and not letting them have their way, while giving them a gift could result in a more adversarial relationship rather than automatically be a sign of friendship. The character stories and arcs are revealed little by little in each act, and their relationships will progress with each other just as much as they do with the protagonist. We'll also be reintroduced to several of the major cultures and conflicts from the first game. While things like the plight of the elves and the threat of the Darkspawn are now downplayed, the Qunari, the mages and the Templars take centre stage in this drama. While Sten didn't exactly glaze the Qun in the first game, and we certainly had the opportunity to poke a few holes in his way of life, his views are those of someone who is satisfied with his role in the Qun, and he has little to say about what befalls those who are dissatisfied with their roles, or even wish to leave the Qun to live a life on their own terms. In this game though, all of that is laid bare in its raw, ugly state, and we have to deal with a huge clash of cultures as a large group of Qunari wind up trapped in Kirkwall for an extended period of time. When we visited the Mage's Circle in Ferelden during the Mage origin story, we saw it as more of a place of learning and safety. Yes, there were Templars there, and yes, they were ever vigilant for a hint of demonic influence, with their hands never far from their blades, but it didn't feel too overbearing. The dissenters we deal with in the Circle chapter of the game come across as extremists under the influence of demons who are beyond saving or redemption. In Kirkwall, however, the oppression the mages live beneath seems to be unbearable. The Templars have a strong presence in Kirkwall, and even political power due to their might. The mages are locked in a fortress that was once used to house slaves. While we can assume it's a little more comfortable now versus then, they are forbidden to walk the streets, drink alcohol, or even have romantic relationships with each other.
The Ferelden Circle's more fun. Everyone was kissing everyone. Though that was before the abominations.
Every aspect of their lives is policed and punishments are swift and severe. Now, the runaways and apostates reaching for demonic power for salvation seem less like extremists, and more like oppressed and tormented minorities breaking beneath constant antagonism and reaching for the only weapon they have left to strike back with. Though that by no means implies that there aren't those who revel in their perversion and dark power. We actually see examples of fanatics on both sides here, stoking the flames of fire to force a confrontation and an outcome they desire. Fear of the other is a big theme here. From refugees to an alien culture that doesn't respect your own, to the worst case scenario for the mages, fear is at the heart of all this conflict. That's not to say that the fear is unfounded. Oh no. There is very real danger in both the Qunari and the mages for sure. But there are a lot of people, seemingly unable or unwilling to face that rationally, and as the fear rises, so does the antagonism. Suffice to say though, there are no clean-cut answers to any of the problems in this story. Neither the status quo nor any of the alternatives are promising, and the game has no intention of letting you sit on the fence or try to figure out some diplomatic solution to this one either. No, it's made very clear that not acting makes you just as guilty for the outcome as stepping up does, so our hero is going to have to choose a side and get their hands slicked in blood. But they are a living legend, so that's hardly surprising. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? And we aren't going to get much further without some heavy spoilers from this point on. So, where the hell do we start? Well, how about we first meet our unreliable narrator and Dragon Age's best dwarf. Sorry, Ogrin. And see if we can't finance a trip into the deep roads to seek our fortune. The primary conflict of Act 1 is pretty low stakes and personal compared to the rest of the game. But it's here that the seeds are sown for what we'll be facing down the line. Hawk and his brother not only repaid their debts to the smugglers who took them in, but also excelled at their work, making quite the name for themselves in the underworld. The hero of Ferelden struck down the archdemon, and the blight was ended. You're welcome. But with Lothering wiped off the face of Thedas, Kirkwall became the family's home. Unfortunately, Kirkwall is not only crawling with Templars, who seem to sense apostates and demons wherever they turn, though they never seem to pick up on the fact that I'm walking around with a skull-capped staff on my back or just blatantly using fireballs in the streets in broad daylight. But a Qunari dreadnought was destroyed in a storm, stranding a few hundred of their warriors in the city too. With the Templars catching wind of the apostate mage operating in the slums, the Hawk brothers try to make their fortune by signing on as muscle with a dwarf named Bartrand, who is planning an expedition into the deep roads. There is a window of several months after a blight, where the roads are relatively free of darkspawn, which means enterprising expeditioners have a chance at reaching forgotten taigs and looting them of treasure long thought lost and forgotten. Bartrand isn't having any of it though. He just sees a couple of Fereldans looking for a meal ticket out of the slums and tells them to shove off. Bartrand's silver-tongued brother Varric though, well, he's a little more discerning, and when a pickpocket tries to make Hawk's already limited funds even more limited, the smooth and cunning dwarf decides to make a dramatic entrance of his own.
I knew a guy once who could take every coin out of your pockets just by smiling at you. But you don't have the style to work Hightown, let alone the Merchants Guild.
Slick. While Varric doubts he can get his stone-headed brother to take the Hawks on as talent, he has a different route for them to offer. Become business partners. Invest in the expedition. All they need to do is hand over 50 sovereigns and they'll get a ticket into the deep roads and a full share of the loot rather than a salary. Oh, perfect. Why didn't I think of just having money to solve my problems before we approached Bartrand? Thank you for pointing this out to me. I mean, my original plan for 50 sovereigns was to open a business, try to make an honest living, and pay my way out of poverty. But clearly, what I should be doing is investing in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to join an expedition that's traveling for weeks underground into the deep roads, a place crawling with giant spiders, carnivorous lizards, and only Maker knows what else, to find a lost dwarven stronghold that may or may not have enough loot for me to make a big return on my investment. And then haul that all the way back to Kirkwall without being eaten alive by monsters or stabbed in the back by an opportunistic helper who decided that his cut isn't worth the work he's putting in. And while we're at it, we should probably pick up a few shares in GameStop. I hear those things are going to skyrocket in value any day now. Well, no one ever said that the road to becoming a legend was safe, and with pressure coming from the Templars, a big payday would help in more ways than one. Various changes were made to the Eclipse engine for the second game. This was less work overall than building the damn thing from scratch, and it edges out the look of this game a little closer to what we were getting with Mass Effect, while still keeping its unique visual aesthetic. One area that is significantly different in this game is the UI, which is,
This is a work of art. This is bullshit.
Well, no, it's not actually that bad, but we've gone from having the ultimate adventurer's journal to, something I can only describe as video game UI. In our new journal, our quests are divided into main plot, companions, premium content, aka DLC, and side quests. You only really need to complete the main plot to progress the story, but unless you're a speedrunner or something, I can't imagine why you wouldn't be chasing down everything you come across. Well, aside from a few painfully tedious side quests that aren't really worth the effort, but we'll save the complaining for later. Since our main objective now is to find work and get paid, we'll need to start exploring the map of the area and the larger city for any potential leads on work. The Chanter's board from the first game is back, but it's not used as much in this one. If you recall from the Dragon Age 1 video, each new area we entered had its own main story to follow that was focused on some unique aspect of the culture of the race whose domain we had entered, as well as a few side quests peppered around the place to flesh the area out. Denerim, on the other hand, was side content central. There were multiple job boards and various NPCs with a ton of go to location A, kill NPC B, and bring back item C, style quests to pad out the game and fill your purse with gold. These quests made a cursory nod towards some kind of story or organization behind them, but felt much more like content that was there to pad the runtime than anything else. Every RPG has these. It's fine, but let's call it what it is. All of that gets smashed together here in Kirkwall, and this opening chapter especially feels much less like going on some big and exciting adventure like in the Mage's Tower or Orzammar, and much more like taking care of everyone else's dirty laundry like we did in Denerim. On both the main map and the mini-map up in the top right corner here, you'll find little exclamation marks that represent leads on potential work. Specifically, work that involves you turning people into meat paste that can be spread on sandwiches. There are various quests that range from stories that are revealed across each chapter, where your choices here will have repercussions all the way over at the end of the game, to quests so insignificant that I didn't even realize I had them in my journal. I'd just show up in Kirkwall after visiting a dungeon area, visit all the highlighted NPCs, and sometimes I'd just click on them, get a line of stock dialogue about finding something, the little quest complete jingle, a notification that a quest I wasn't aware of had been completed, and some gold for my troubles. So, quite the range, all things considered. Kirkwall itself is divided into several hubs that range from the Chantry and the Viscount's Keep at the top of the city, all the way down to the docks and the gallows at the very bottom. Each of these environments shows a new face of the City of Chains, and each can be visited during either the day or the night. To complete some quests, you'll have to visit a district at a specific time, but handy-dandy little icons will let you know if there's a quest that can be completed within an area. Traveling at nighttime puts you at high risk of being attacked. Rather than having random encounters happening on the road between locations, they now take place within the city's shadier districts. In Kirkwall, there are numerous illegal operators, ranging from Dwarven Carter to Tevinter slavers, as well as plenty of homegrown talent, all of whom are more than willing to throw wave upon wave of bodies at you and your companions to get at what little gold you've actually got stashed in your purse. My guys, there has to be an easier way for you to make a living than this. Walking around, we can see plenty of graphical improvements too. And while most of the NPCs are still just standing around not doing much, a few more have patrol routes and at least seem to be doing something with their time than in Origins. I have the higher resolution textures DLC installed. This was free DLC, specifically for PC, that was released along with the game. Basically, a way to give people with higher end rigs at the time a bit of a visual bump over what the console peasants had. Character models and faces have all had a noticeable bump as well. This is in part due to a significant change in how armor is handled. Basically, you can only change Hawk's outfit. The other characters have their own signature looks that let them stand out from the crowds of NPCs, all wearing stock outfits and rocking stock haircuts. You can still change out their weapons and accessories, but if you want to increase your companion's armor rating or the number of enchantment slots in their gear, you need to find special upgrade materials for them. These don't make any cosmetic changes though. Only taking certain characters as your lover will lead them to change their outfit. I will say the drip is much better in this game than in Origins. There are still silly hats for mages, but there's plenty of hoods and cool looking robes. The chunky Space Marine style shoulder pads have been ditched on heavier armors too, and there's a lot less clipping overall on armors when characters are walking. Oh, and we can't not admire the armor of the champion if we're enjoying the drip. It's a thing of absolute beauty, and a great reward for hitting that final act. The monsters also got their own graphical bump. The iconic shades and demons are all looking sharper and crisper, and clearly rocking higher resolution textures, with much better normal maps than in the previous game. Suffice to say, time was well spent on the engine, and the results show. While we start our adventure in the markets of Hightown, where we'll find lots of vendors and even be reunited with a couple of familiar faces,
Enchantment?
the Hawk family now has its base of operations in Lowtown, at the house of their uncle, Gamlin. As Amir Moher points out in a Eurogamer article from 2024, so many role-playing games I have encountered focus on gathering friends and romantic interests around the protagonist, but how much focus do they give to your character's family members? I have an older brother myself, and when we were kids, we were probably fighting every day. We've also grown up into very different people. That doesn't mean I don't love him. I'll never forget our evenings playing Hero Quest together, but we're also far from being best friends too. Family is complicated, and there is a lot going on with the Hawk family. First of all, what the hell is a woman with an estate in Kirkwall doing raising apostate children in a backwater village like Lothering? Well, the apostate part goes some way towards answering that question. We saw in Origins that mages are taken from their homes and families once their power manifests, and they are denied any kind of title. This isn't something that you can buy your way out of either. Not officially anyway. We saw that once the Earl of Redcliffe's son manifested his power, his mother embarked upon a scheme to have an apostate train him to hide his abilities, rather than see him shipped off to the Circle Tower and out of her life forever. This plan, well, it didn't go exactly to plan, let's put it that way. For the nobility, it's also considered a black mark on your bloodline to have magic in it, which could affect your standing and potential alliances down the line. Finally, as we'll dive into later, no loving parent could honestly want their child carted off to a place called the Gallows, to be locked in the Kirkwall Mage's Tower and treated like a prisoner. While there is more to learn about Hawk's father in Dragon Age Inquisition, what we learn about him in 2 is somewhat limited. We know that he was a mage who Leandra fell in love with, and ultimately ran away with. Leandra explains that magic was already in their bloodline, and that this made it almost impossible to arrange a political marriage for their family. By having children with a mage, she only increased the magic in their blood. Certainly, having 2 mages in the same family would be a very rare thing. And this is actually another tidbit about magic and mages that we weren't privy to in the first game. While living in hiding, Hawk's father spent a lot of time with him and his sister Bethany, teaching them not to fear their power, but also how to hide it from others so they wouldn't get caught by Templars. This meant he had a lot less time overall for his second son Carver, who wasn't a mage, and that led to an interesting family dynamic here. Carver isn't openly hostile towards his brother, but his attitude is very much over on the rival side of the scale. This isn't the same as the first game's low and high approval system. A rival isn't just going to turn on you in this game, and you can even romance someone whose rivalry is maxed out. Basically, you want your companions to have strong opinions about you. Maybe you are completely on the same wavelength, or maybe you butt heads and challenge each other a lot. Both of these are a better outcome than indifference. There is a kind of breaking point later on, but it's temporary at best. Friends are supposed to challenge each other and point out when they're being dumbasses just as much as they're supposed to be nice to each other after all. Carver is kind of used to playing second fiddle to his brother. When Varric points out that Hawk is the talk of Lowtown and him not so much, he isn't exactly surprised. He's clearly been referred to as Hawk's brother before, and really needs an opportunity to get away from him and maybe his whole family for a while and figure things out for himself. An opportunity that's going to be thrust upon him a lot sooner than he realizes. The family now resides in Gamlin's abode in Lowtown, and you might think it a dump, but in 2026, most of us can only dream of actually owning a property of comparable size and being able to build a home in it. Leandra, despite having roughed it as a farmer in Lothering, is still distressed about her change in status here, despite having over a year to get used to the idea that this is her life now. But I guess this is a small place for a family of 4 and their adorable Mibari Warhound, who I of course named Garrus again. Garrus doesn't take up a party slot like he did in the first game. Hawk can just summon him in to bolster the party's damage output at any time. But there is something of a drama here that needs resolving. On one hand we have Gamlin, the man who pissed away a fortune and an estate on gambling, and the other his distraught sister. It would seem she was struck from the will after abandoning her family to run off with her apostate husband and make mage babies. However, that will is far out of reach, being locked up in the old family estate, which none of them have access to anymore. Carver is incredibly indifferent to all of this, having lived his life completely cut off from this world or this side of the family. He's used to living poor, or at least working class, and he certainly doesn't feel he owes any loyalty to this part of his family history. That's not to say he doesn't care about his mother, but he certainly doesn't care about her redeeming her family name. He's also somewhat sympathetic to Gamlen, as it seems Leandra was clearly the favourite in their family, and he in her shadow. A state of affairs he can at least empathise with. Things all come to a head after we break into the old estate, set fire to a bunch of slavers holed up there, and find the will to discover that the estate and the family fortune were in fact all left to Leandra, with only a stipend set aside for Gamlen. And you might feel this is a moment for a triumphant "Ha! In your face!" for this sleazy loser who practically sold you into slavery. But it's not like Gamlen doesn't have a side to all of this. After all, he was the one who stayed and had to deal with the fallout of Leandra abandoning the family. He was the one who took care of their elderly parents on their deathbeds. And for all his efforts, he was rewarded by hearing only about her. As something of a Buddhist, I don't think that our feelings are especially good or bad. They're just feelings. We can't control how they rise up. It's what we do with them that matters. Gamlen had a right to be bitter about what happened, and we can at least concede that he wasn't in the best frame of mind when he made the choices that he made. But he is absolutely responsible for repeatedly squandering his fortune on gambling and cheap thrills. He at least serves as an example for Carver about what not to do with his life. Indeed, Carver has his mind set on the future, on building something new rather than trying to resurrect something old, and clearly long dead as well. For now, we'll say that in my playthrough at least, Carver certainly carves a legend of his own by the end. The quest to settle things with Flemeth is what brings us into contact with Merrill. Merrill is an incredibly charming Dalish elf mage, who reminds me somewhat of Mass Effect's Tali for her random social awkwardness. On the surface, she's bubbly and positive. She's voiced by Eva Miles, who in 2011 appeared in BBC's Torchwood, a kind of darker spin-off of Doctor Who that was pretty experimental in its own way, but really lost its way and ended on a whimper rather than a bang. While it sure is nice to hear all these nice English voices in fantasy RPGs with a variety of accents, we don't hear Welsh all that much, and I genuinely appreciate this little detail about Merrill. Suffice to say, I think she's very well cast. Beneath the surface of her adorable exterior though, Merrill is hiding a dark secret, and something like an obsession. She has cast herself as a kind of sacrificial lamb, and placed the attainment of a personal goal that may possibly benefit her people higher than the safety of her own life, and even her soul. If you've played the Dalish elf origin story in the first game, I never actually had until I read about this, then you've already met Merrill, and seen the seeds of her story get sown. The Dalish warden and his hunting partner Tamlin enter a forgotten Tevinter fortress in the Basilian forest, and find some kind of magic mirror there. Tamlin is Thanos snapped out of existence by this thing, and the protagonist becomes infected with the Darkspawn taint, leading Duncan to recruit him into the Wardens. We actually link up with Merrill in this quest, and return to the site of the mirror with her. She sees the Darkspawn, and watches Duncan shatter the mirror. The clan pack up and head north to avoid the Blight not long after, and while it isn't made clear at the time, it seems that Merrill took these losses more than a little personally. Tamlin does show up later in the Dalish Warden's adventure, but Merrill never got any closure on the issue. Merrill has led a life dedicated to her craft rather than the development of personal relationships, and certainly doesn't know much about humans or what the Dalish call Shemlin.
This city is amazing. Do you know I saw someone get mugged? Right outside. It was fascinating.
She's lived her whole life with her tribe, and certainly isn't used to the crowded streets of a big city like Kirkwall. and she can be very naive in many ways. She pairs well with Isabela, who is kind of her opposite, though I think Isabela and Aveline have the best banter in the game.
How good is Donick? Is he cocksure?
Just get it out of your system.
Did he curl your toes? Grope your grinder? Dampen your divine? Pamper your paragon? Establish his canon? How about satisfy a demand of your Qun?
Yes, all right. He's an incredibly proficient lover. Happy?
Well, that's rather personal, don't you think?
The Dalish are camped on Sundermount. We were introduced to two distinct types of elf in Origins, those being city elves, who live as second-class citizens in human cities, and Dalish, who move in small nomadic tribes and try to keep to their ancient way of life. These clans are led by keepers. The name comes from the fact that they keep what little knowledge there is of their ancient customs in their minds, and distribute it to their clan via stories. A keeper is always a mage. This is one of the reasons they steer clear of human society. Keepers are apostates in the eyes of the Chantry, and would either be forced into the mage's circle or straight up killed by Templars if they were caught by them. The Chantry also takes issues with the Dalish worshipping their old gods because, well, it's a religion. I don't need to say any more than that. And there's the countless atrocities perpetrated against the elves both historically, where they were kept as slaves and blood bags by the Tevinter Magisters, to more recent events, like what happened to Zathrian in Origins. After having his wife and daughter violated and murdered by humans, and knowing he would never receive justice through conventional means, he used Dalish blood magic to create a great wolf spirit, and inflict lycanthropy upon the people who wronged him. I bring it up here because in this game, we can actually run into the consequences of our actions. Somewhat. Reactivity is something BioWare were big on in both Mass Effect and Dragon Age. This even crosses over into the sequels, that allow players to import save data from their previous games, and set certain world flags from that. This will lead to unique events and encounters, albeit small ones, created from the choices that were made in the previous games. While venturing out of the city, I actually encountered a former werewolf being confronted by a Dalish elf, who lost their mother to him in his bestial form. I wonder how they knew it was him specifically. It would seem that Zathrian's revenge has spiraled out into a never-ending cycle of bloodshed. We can assume this is only one of many similar encounters that have happened across Ferelden and similar areas in the aftermath of the first game. You're welcome to help to resolve the situation, or not, but as a Joe Abercrombie fan who rather enjoys the book Best Served Cold, and the absurd degree it takes the spiral of vengeance, I decided to put a stop to this before it got even more out of hand. Another example of this is when we bump into a dwarf named Renville Harrowmont. We find him being attacked by Carter thugs in broad daylight. The name Harrowmont should set off all the alarm bells for any Origins player. When we arrived in Orzammar in that game, the dwarves were basically locked in an Ascension feud for the next king, with the candidates being Balin and Harrowmont. The player can, via a lengthy quest, speak with the voice of a dwarven paragon and cast the deciding vote. No sooner is the new king crowned though, and he orders his former political rival executed, and has since been picking off his family members, one by one. Well, 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 if it isn't the consequences of my actions. So, Renville has fled to the surface, but even that isn't far enough it seems. Again, we can help, or not, but it's a great little callback. Once we arrive at the Dalish camp and gain our new companion, we ascend the mountain, where we discover that Flemeth's trinket actually contains a shard of her essence. One of many such shards, I'd guess. Once released, she will in time recover to her full strength, and resume whatever schemes she previously had. One thing I didn't like about this area is that you can both fight and defeat a Revenant on Sundermount very early. Revenants are supposed to be these super challenging enemies for high level parties. There is one weaker variant in one of the areas in the first game, but I felt this was way too early to be dropping such a big bad on us, and it somewhat dilutes their impact when they show up later. So back to Sundermount and Merrill. The tribe's keeper, Marathari, seems well aware of what needs to be done with Flemeth's trinket, and is willing to offer the aid of her first in exchange for Hawke taking her back with him to the city. Merrill has decided to leave her tribe. Keeper Marathari doesn't want her to, but she's not about to force her to stay. Based on our interactions with the hunter that we meet ascending the mountain, it would seem that some of Merrill's tribe are more than eager to be rid of her, even if the Keeper isn't. When we come up against an arcane ward on the mountain though, we start to get a hint of what the problem might be. Oh dear, this is going to blow up in our faces, isn't it? This is how we wind up climbing this mountain for the first of many times, and diving into this network of caves hidden within, and... well, we were gonna have to get to it eventually, so I guess now is as good a time as any to bring this up. One of Dragon Age 2's biggest criticisms was its excessive reuse of dungeon areas for many of its quests. Because development time was limited to the point of being hamstrung, the team didn't have time to build dungeon locations that would only be visited once, and needed to engineer reasons for areas to be revisited as much as possible. They used a couple of techniques to achieve this, one of which I'd say worked quite well, and the other not so much. While the early days of 2D gaming had a lot of one-and-done linear levels, the reusing of spaces that a level designer has spent a lot of time putting together is actually quite common now, even in games that appear linear on the surface. Two examples of games that do this really well are Metal Gear Solid, in this case I'll use 2 as an example, and Deus Ex Mankind Divided. In the opening hours of Raiden's story in MGS2, we are running around each strut of the big shell, searching for bombs to disarm. This causes us to pay close attention to the layout and guard patrols in each area, and plan our route around the place while we hunt for the bombs. Once that section is complete, we get a message concerning another bomb on a timer that's more or less all the way back where we started. So we go through the same areas in reverse, but now we use all the knowledge we gained in the first section to plan a fast and efficient route back the way we came in order to beat the clock. Literally nothing has changed in the levels, only the pressure we're now under to get through them. So same levels, completely new feel. In Mankind Divided, we spend the majority of the game visiting various hubs in Prague to complete missions. These missions require us to learn the ins and outs and all the little secrets of each of these hubs, and this knowledge is put to great use when in one of the final missions, the city is locked down and we have to sneak or fight our way through the streets to get to our objective. Again, almost nothing changes in the level layout, but they added some enemies and barricades, and suddenly, the whole space has a new challenge attached to it. Dragon Age 2 does okay with its city areas. You can visit them at either day or night to catch a different vibe, and it feels normal to be revisiting these places as we travel around ticking off quests. They could have stood to have some changes take place to these areas over the course of the years between chapters, but from what I've read, that was something else that got cut during development. Game development has a lot of redundancy at the best of times, and even projects with this kind of deadline can lose their focus. Laidlaw has commented himself on how he'd be running the ship with a much tighter focus were he able to do it all again. In the end, this wasn't just a level pack or DLC for Dragon Age Origins, it was a new game, and they wanted to bring engine upgrades and mechanical changes to the table, as well as a new story. So things got suggested, tried, and in a lot of cases, abandoned. While this is very normal for any game, it was absolutely devastating for Dragon Age 2, with its limited time frame, and led to a massive amount of things getting left on the cutting room floor. As well as the city, there are some larger outdoor areas such as the Wounded Coast. This is quite a big map, with a lot of locations to place enemies, for the purposes of specific quests. In every chapter, all the containers can refresh and new random encounters can logically fill up the area, along with any quest-specific ones. I'm not going to say that these areas don't get tiring eventually, as it becomes clear that this method was a crutch rather than a stylistic choice like in Eternal Darkness. But it's far more forgivable than the situation with the interior dungeons. Reusing part of, or even an entire dungeon with a bit of editing is quite normal. Think about all those random caves and barrows and whatnot in Skyrim. Ignoring the fact that it could be days between when you enter 2 with the same tile set, you won't have anything like perfect recall for the dungeon you've just finished. So creating a new dungeon by duplicating an interior cell, changing the starting location, moving a few corridors around and reorganizing the clutter is generally a fine starting point. From there you add the unique memorable features that you want to give the lasting impression of the place, drop it into a playtest build, and see if anyone notices. If the QA guys don't realize, chances are the average Joe Skyrim lover isn't going to notice until his 200th playthrough, and by then, it's well past Steam's 2-hour refund window. So it's not like Dragon Age 2 was doing anything new here. They just didn't have time to do even a halfway decent job of it. They literally just drop you into the same dungeon. They'll block off various areas to prevent you exploring the whole thing again, but they're still here on the map. That to me is the most egregious part, to be honest. The fact that they aren't even hiding that those other parts of the dungeon are still there. I feel like if there's one thing I can blame BioWare specifically for, it's that. Of course, I don't know the reason why it is the way it is, and I'm not even going to try and guess because I know less about the workings of the Eclipse engine than I do quantum mechanics. But as a purely vibes thing, that just feels a little too cheeky. Maybe someone at BioWare was secretly waving a help us flag with this one? So yeah, there are a set of dungeon spaces that are not supposed to be the same areas, that are just copy-pasted maps with almost zero edits. To be honest, this was the breaking point for me back in the day, and was why I didn't complete this game until now. Since it's no secret that it's there, and more importantly, why it's there, I can be more forgiving of it now, and it probably wasn't until the third act that I was getting really fed up with visiting the same old places over and over. Repeating an entire boss fight for both Merrill's quest and the Zevron quest was especially annoying, and felt genuinely bad. Oh yeah, he's in here. We'll talk about him a little later. So yeah, one big minus in the dungeons column here. I suppose if this was your first Dragon Age, things could only go up from here, but for those of us who'd come from the first game and weren't so clued up on the circumstances of this one's development, this was a huge disappointment, and felt genuinely disrespectful to the players, and just straight up lazy from the devs. So with Flemeth now released and free to regrow her power and become a potential threat for her daughter Morrigan down the line again, we can return to the city. Merrill comes back to Kirkle with us, where she hopes to simply get lost among the many, many people there, though she is clearly unprepared for the size of the city, its population, and the harsh reality of city elf life in the alienage. Merrill eventually confides that she's trying to reconstruct an Alluvian mirror, similar, if not the same one as the one we encountered in Origins. She believes this is an important part of her people's history that she can restore to them. But there is more to it than that. This is clearly a grief reaction too. Her friend vanished from her life and she wasn't able to do anything about it. She feels that by cleansing the mirror of its taint and restoring something from the elves' long forgotten past to them, that she can give some meaning to her friend's loss. Since she lacked the lyrium needed to cleanse the shard, she reached out to a demon imprisoned on Sundermount for aid. And that was how she was able to use blood magic to get the job done. Now she's cast out of her clan, a stranger in the human world, and both an apostate and a malefica in a city full of Templars who operate beneath the whip of a very overbearing Knight Commander. She's placed her quest above even her life, and it's going to take a true friend or someone who really loves her to save her from herself. Her use of the Forbidden Art also places her directly at odds with two other important companions in the narrative, that being the runaway Tevinter slave Fenris, and the apostate come Grey Warden Anders, and they both have very good reasons for holding the views that they do. Fenris and Anders present two sides of an argument that prevails throughout most of the game's story, and becomes the central conflict of the final chapter. That being the plight of the mages and freedom versus security. Fenris is a runaway Tevinter slave with amnesia, bearing a powerful magical mark that lets him do this.
I am not a slave.
One of my friends described Fenris as the most 2010s character you could imagine, and I can't shake that image from my head now. I mean, Black Parade was like 2006, but it kinda fits. Since his escape, he's been hounded by his former master Denarius, looking not to get him back, but his skin, so that he can recover the enchantment grafted onto it. Tevinter represents the absolute worst case scenario for mage freedom. Historically, the Tevinter Empire was vast and the world trembled beneath the might of their magisters. Their hubris created the Darkspawn, and only the devastation they suffered from the First Blight, and the rise of Andraste and the Chantry, finally broke them and freed Ferelden, Orlais, and many other regions from their might. As a preventative measure against this kind of power ever rising again, Magic Serving Man was baked into the Chantry's dogma, and the Circle of the Magi was established to foster mages that would benefit the larger society, outlaw blood magic, and safeguard against demonic influences. While this system exists in Ferelden, Orlais, and the Free Marches as intended, things quickly reverted back to their old status quo in Tevinter. The entire story is long and involves a lot of wars and crusades, but as it stands, the Imperium is still under Magister rule. Fenris says himself that the mages in countries like Ferelden, generally, don't come from noble bloodlines. We've already addressed the stigma that having magic in your family brings about in this part of the world, and money is still the ultimate power, even in Thedas. As such, it was much easier to establish the new order in countries like Ferelden, while the mage bloodlines in Tevinter come from wealthy stock that are used to getting their way. While they played lip service to the Chantry rules for a while, they were soon governing themselves and slipping back into their old habits. Tevinter now has its own version of the Chantry, with its own interpretation of the rules. Slavery and blood magic are still openly practiced, and they are and have been at war with the Qunari for a very long time. Having lived beneath mage rule, his body treated like an asset, changed into a weapon that his master can throw at his enemies, and seeing countless atrocities committed by mages, Fenris is very justified in his low opinion of them, magic, and his support of not only the Circle's restrictions on mage freedoms, but even the more extreme measures that take place within Kirkwall specifically. That's not to say he is a complete fanatic by any means. He is willing to work with Hawk, despite my Hawk being a mage, and judge him based on his character and his actions, rather than an inherited trait over which he has no control. But he is certainly suspicious. What seems like a side quest just to get paid leads to us being introduced to Fenris. We show up to take care of some thugs, and it turns out we were being used as bait to lure out bounty hunters so that Fenris could get the drop on them rather than the other way around. He apologizes for his deception and explains the situation to us. We help to clean out a mansion where his former master may reside, and find the place crawling with shades from the Fade. We actually fight an ungodly amount of these things through this game. But here we see firsthand the casual way blood magic is used in the Imperium, with little regard for the safety of others. After clearing the place out, Fenris takes up residence there to rub a little salt in the wounds he's already inflicted on his former master. After all, he's quite sure his master will want his expensive estate back at some point. All he needs to do is drag Fenris out of it, flay the skin off his back, and he'll have everything that he wants. The problem for Daenerys, of course, is that while he might be a powerful political figure in Tevinter, he's just another mage here in Kirkwall, and that greatly limits his resources and leaves him very vulnerable. Fenris is passionate and quick to anger. He wields a two-handed weapon, and he moves like the Doomslayer into battle. I tallied up quite the rivalry with him throughout the game, due to everything from disagreeing with him on his opinions about mages, to rejecting his romantic advances towards me. According to Gaida and Laidlaw, that second part wasn't something they'd meant to keep in the game. In order to save time, all but one of the characters was assigned double duty on being romanceable by male and female Hawks. This apparently upset some players, not because of the usual reaction to anything LGBTQ showing up in a game, but because some completionist types felt slighted by the game taking rep from them with one character in the interest of romancing and being faithful to another. And I think that's fair to say at least. We've all been rejected at one point or another in our lives, and yeah, it does suck, and leave a bad taste in your mouth. But hopefully we grow past that and don't hold it against the other person. The other read on this is that people who'd played Origins probably didn't quite understand the differences in the new affinity system, and figured friendship good, rivalry bad, rather than understanding that high rivalry can be as beneficial as high friendship. I'll admit, I did try to meet Fenris halfway for a while, but he seems very all or nothing on his views, and in the end, I just abandoned him to his hate. But there is more to him that we'll cover in the endgame section. Anders is, in many ways, the complete opposite of Fenris. Where Fenris has suffered beneath magic, Anders has suffered because he's a mage. Where Fenris uses his time and skills to plot his revenge, Anders offers healing to people in the poorest parts of the city, free of charge. Both of them have a great disdain for blood magic and demons though, which in Anders' case, comes from a deeply personal place. Also, if you played Dragon Age Awakening, well, you've already met him. Awakening is a stellar DLC, hampered by a few problems. For a start, it's not as polished or well playtested as Origins, and there are various game-breaking bugs that persist even now. The combat was also kind of annoying too. It basically felt like they run out of ideas for interesting ways to make fights challenging, and just resorted to enemies with bigger health pools, and having multiple waves of reinforcements ready to spawn into the fight once the current wave had lost enough people. Just throwing more stuff at the player is a very weak source solution to difficulty problems, which is... yeah, we'll rant about that in this game later too. The story, however, was another BioWare banger of the time. There are two major threads running through it that converge in an incredible final battle. The first is that King Alistair. Anyone whose Dragon Age world doesn't have Alistair ruling as the most awesome king ever isn't welcome here, I'm afraid. Gifting an Arling to the Grey Wardens, meaning either the hero of Ferelden or a new Warden commander from Orlais, is tasked with bolstering the Grey Warden ranks within Ferelden, managing the nobles, strengthening the keep, and building an elite posse of badasses to tackle a new Darkspawn threat. This threat is our second plot hook. Rather than simply return beneath the surface to dig out another dragon to corrupt, many Darkspawn have stayed on the surface and are acting far too intelligently for soulless killing machines that aren't being guided by an archdemon. This brings us into confrontation with a new evolution of the Darkspawn, and something like their first civil war. Now, there is more information on the Darkspawn known as the Architect in Inquisition, but let's cross bridges as we come to them and avoid jumping all over the place. In Awakening, he is simply a Darkspawn that seems to be possessed of a will of his own, and one that doesn't hear the song of the old gods, compelling him to dig them out of the ground. While the Architect has success in freeing other Darkspawn from their bondage, his mistake is in assuming that they'd be grateful for the freedom he forced upon them. When he freed a broodmother, she felt like she'd been torn away from the divine music and deprived of her purpose in the world. As a regular Darkspawn, she was part of a collective, one of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, all working towards a seemingly divine goal. Without the music though, she feels cut off and alone, and is now faced with having to find her own purpose and make her own way. This fostered hatred within her for the creature that stole the music from her and led her to lash out at him. You see here, we're dealing with freedom versus security again. Is it better to submit to the will of the group and gain their acceptance and protection, or strike out alone and take on all the work and insecurities that come along with that? Kinda like... yeah, we're getting to those guys, don't worry. More importantly though, one of the first new recruits into the Ferelden Grey Wardens is a carefree apostate mage named Anders. He's not a Malefica, or even particularly dangerous. He's just a free spirit who wants to spread his wings and fly, rather than have them clipped by Templar steel. In Dragon Age 2, we are introduced to him when Varric tells us we need to find a Deep Roads access point for the expedition. The only people who know the Deep Roads as well as the Legion of the Dead are Grey Wardens. And it just so happens that there's rumours of a Ferelden Warden helping out the sick and needy in Darktown. Darktown was once a mine, and is now quite possibly the worst place to live in all of Kirkwall. While the Elven alienage is also way down there on the scale of things, they at least have fresh air and natural light sources. This is the land of the destitute and the desperate, and all manner of scum that preys upon them. What this place needs is Batman. But they got Anders instead. Anders and Justice. Justice is another character from the Awakening expansion. Demons aren't the only spirits that inhabit the Fade. Not by a long shot. It's just that they're the only ones interested in the mortal realm, and they go out of their way to interact with mortals and try to cross over through them. While demons are manifestations of vices, other spirits can take the form of virtues. Our best healer Wynn was watched over by a spirit of faith in Origins, and later in Awakening, when we're dragged into the Fade by Darkspawn magic, we encountered Justice, preparing to take the fight to a demon who has held the entire residents of a village captive as its personal playthings for a very long time. Our battle in the Fade leads to us being violently ejected from there, and Justice is thrust into the body of a recently dead Grey Warden named Christoph. The relationship between Anders and Justice doesn't exactly flourish in the DLC, but as he tells it, it's something that came about later. With Fenris, we see some of the worst excesses of the mages. With Anders, it's the Templars who are very much in the wrong. His first companion quest involves linking up with another apostate from the Ferelden Circle, who's held up in Kirkwall, and that meeting goes very bad.
Anders, I know you too well. I knew you would never give up.
What's wrong? Why are you talking like...
I was too rebellious, like you. The Templars knew I had to be made an example of.
Tranquilling mages, i.e. cutting off their connection to the Fade and burning out all their emotions, is one of the Circle's more controversial practices. While some mages do volunteer for the process, it is more often than not mages who don't play by the rules, or who are deemed too great of a threat for possession. You might say prevention is better than the cure, but I'd counter with, we don't execute or imprison people who might murder someone, no matter how likely it seems. Seeing a close friend hollowed out and used as bait to lure him into a trap unleashes something inside Anders. Something truly terrifying.
You will never take another mage as you took him.
Justice wasn't actually sure if he could return to the Fade simply by leaving the body of Christoph, and he had no desire to wear another corpse, especially after seeing how what happened with Christoph affected his wife. Anders offered himself as a host. It was a fair compromise. They were friends. He was willing. Their relationship could be symbiotic and beneficial to them both. Unfortunately, Anders' rage at the injustices committed upon the Circle mages was too overpowering for Justice, and he morphed into a spirit of vengeance. The, elven mage named Solus reveals more about how mortal expectations can transform spirits in a later game. But suffice to say, Anders and Justice are basically an abomination, and a very powerful one at that. The most painful part of this scene is that Anders' power briefly reconnects his friend with the Fade and returns his emotions to him. A Tranquil doesn't complain about being tranquil because it doesn't have any feelings about being tranquil. But a mage who remembers what it's like to be one, well, that's an entirely different matter. And so, just like Wesley, we are tasked with putting another lost soul out of his misery. This game is absolutely loaded with desperate apostates trying to escape an overbearing Circle, blood mages that truly revel in their perversion and willfully, even gleefully, commit atrocities on Templars and anyone who happens to stumble across them. But it also has plenty of overzealous Templars abusing their power and status over the mages, and even using their position as trusted preachers to the masses to sow misinformation and fear among the common people. Both Fenris and Anders have plenty of opportunities to be proved right. But that's not to say we don't encounter any good Templars. We can meet Templars who genuinely have the mage's best interests at heart, and want the Circle to truly be a place where mages can safely master their powers of magic, so that magic can truly become a force for good in the world. How we handle all these different situations, and the stance we ultimately take on the greater conflict, will affect the disposition of our allies too, and that can even affect their combat talents. The talent trees in this game have been altered from the original's simple linear progression system to provide players with a few more options for their builds. As before, talents are divided into passives that provide permanent bonuses to a character's abilities, Sustain skills such as auras or battle stances that eat up a segment of your maximum mana or stamina to remain active, and activated talents that you spend mana or stamina on and then go into cooldown for a short period before they can be activated again. When leveling up, as before, you'll gain 3 points to throw into your stats. Each class has 2 critical stats that power their talents, and everyone can benefit from a few points being dropped into their willpower and constitution now and then to boost their HP and mana or stamina. Your talents branch out in a couple of directions on each of the trees, and some spells and abilities have been shuffled around. My hawk was a mage, and I knew I was at some point going to be in a one-on-one fight with a Qunari Arishok. My experience in the first game had shown crowd control to be a much more powerful tool than pure damage, and so I hunted down every option I could get to straight up freeze an enemy in their tracks before they could get within attacking range. Even so, you really can't be a mage in an RPG and not drop big fireballs on fools. Well, unless you're raising the dead to fight on your behalf, but that isn't an option in this game. Another change is that talent points can be spent to improve a skill versus just buying new ones. This is actually a smart play, as just buying as many activated talents as possible and firing them all in rapid succession is going to leave you completely spent after the first 30 seconds of a battle. This game does have stamina potions as well as lyrium potions though. Stamina potions were introduced in Awakening, and they're a welcome addition for non-magical characters as it removes a harsh limitation to the use of their talents. Either way, spending talent points on an upgraded version of a skill that you already have is great bang for your buck. I was really underwhelmed with the standard fireball in this game. I mean, this was the first game's fireball. And that thing had friendly fire on. But this is the basic fireball in 2.
Hefty, hefty, hefty! Whippy, whippy, whippy!
But with the upgrade, it feels like it has some kick. Your protagonist can also take a couple of speciality skill trees, some of which we've already seen, though the fan favourite Arcane Warrior is nowhere to be found in this game. The new speciality for mages is Force Mage, and it's absurdly fun. At least until the late game, where the damage of these spells really doesn't keep up with the enemy HP increases. But it's a good mix of crowd control and AoE damage. That Blood Mage tree is there, I know, but I refuse temptation for role-playing reasons. In Origins, specializations could come packaged with companions, who would teach them to you and other characters once your relationship level was high enough. However, companions are a little different here. Each companion has a unique skill tree of their own that reflects their circumstances and specializations. Fenris, for example, can channel the power of the marks on his body, while Anders has powers that come from his knack for healing or the raging demon of vengeance that resides within him. Each character also has a special passive buff that becomes unlocked once their friendship or rival status passes a certain threshold. The one big exception here is Varric, who has an extra special skill tree dedicated to his beloved crossbow, Bianca. So that's our attributes and talents. It's not too different from how Origins handled them. It's just got a little more depth to it that makes you think a tad more carefully about where you distribute your points. Thanks to the Black Emporium DLC, you can buy respec potions if you feel like you've made a mistake and want to take another crack at building your character. It's especially useful if you want to redistribute your attribute points so that your hero Hawk can showcase some of the more exotic drip that's available in the DLCs. Similar to Fenris and Anders, Isabela and Aveline couldn't be more different. At least on the surface anyway. Deep down, Isabela isn't even half the chaotic force of nature she presents herself to be, and Little Miss Straight and Narrow here is more than willing to bend or outright break the rules in the name of what she perceives as the greater good. Where Aveline is a sword and board warrior who thrives facing her enemies head on, Isabela does her best work striking from the shadows and using dirtier tactics to get the job done. Where Aveline is reserved and professional, Isabela is the life and soul of the party, and where Aveline has some interesting ideas about how to win a man's affection.
I need 3 goats and a sheaf of wheat. You'll take them to his mother.
Isabela is... You know what, Zevran? Maybe you can handle this one.
How do you two know each other?
How does anyone know Isabela?
Yes, well, you'll never know Isabela again if you keep that up.
And no judgment either. Live the life you love. We're not here for a long time, so it might as well be a good time. And hell, I'd be something of a hypocrite if I took issue with her life choices. In the time that's passed since we last left Aveline, she has become a member of the City Watch. While being a Ferelden refugee might disqualify you from most work around Kirkwall, having experience in Kaelin's army and surviving Ostagar probably goes a long way towards getting your foot in the door with the local militia. Though I'm not sure who wrote her letters of recommendation. When we meet her, she's bored out of her mind on account of being given quiet patrols in safe parts of the city. While this might sit well with a lesser guard who was just showing up for a paycheck, Aveline is a woman of action and no small ambition. She wants to help people, and in the process, maybe make a bit of a name for herself. She's not hunting glory, she knows exactly what fighting evil really looks like. She just wants the freedom to go where she's needed, and not where she's told to. She's cultivated her own network of informants, it seems, and as well as keeping an eye on both Hawk and the Templars circling him, she's caught the scent of an ambush being planned sometime soon, and rather than wait for someone to get their throat cut and valuables stolen, she feels an enterprising apostate mage and his tit of a brother, her words, not mine,
Bit of a tit, your brother.
might be just the people to help fix this little problem. She insists she'll get around to informing her superiors, if all else fails, but it's very telling that she'd rather venture off her patrol route and handle this herself than go through the correct channels. Taking care of the problem seems to enrage the guard captain, however, so much so that it raises more than a little suspicion in our girl, and pulling on that thread unravels a whole conspiracy whereby the guard captain is placing sensitive information into a satchel for a guard to carry around on a quiet patrol, only to have Carter agents show up and bludgeon the satchel from the guard's hands, quite possibly leaving them for dead in the process. This is all to pay off his gambling debts. Wow, what a fine, upstanding piece of work this guy is. For her efforts though, Aveline not only gets the guard captain stripped of his rank and thrown in jail by his own people, but she also gets the job of guard captain herself, and is tasked with restoring the honour and trust of the guard within the eyes of the people of Kirkwall. Of course, like most idealists who think they can do a better job than their bosses, she's thrown hard up against the wall of budget and manpower. The guard is underfunded and understaffed, and the Templars aren't interested in helping out either. However, she imposes common sense rules like guards always patrolling in pairs and watching each other's backs, and tries to thicken patrols where they're needed the most. Aveline is exactly the kind of person you want captaining your guard and watching your back when staring down mobs of Darkspawn, demons, or Tal Vashoth. Why? Because she genuinely and wholeheartedly cares. She cares about justice, she cares about friendship, and she truly wants to be a shield for those who can't protect themselves. She's very no-nonsense too. In a later scene, she's inspecting the dress armour that is meant to be worn for inspections and parades, and politely tells the Viscount's servant to have it melted down and used to make something that will actually protect her guards. And she's also incredibly emotionally mature. When we bring up Wesley in Act 1, she makes it clear, in no uncertain terms, that she's dealing with it, and that there are boundary lines around this topic. She says that if she ever needs any help in that area, she'll call on Hawk. Which, in a way, she kinda does. While in Dragon Age Origins, the Warden had his pick of the romances, and everyone else just took monk or nun vows for the entire game, characters who aren't romanced by Hawk in this game will eventually start pairing off, which is actually one of the most mature ways I've seen romance handled in any game. Aveline really does deal with her grief for Wesley and reaches a place where she's ready to move on, and she's got her eye on this strapping tank of a man named Donick. This kickstarts one of the most hilarious side quests in the game. There's a lot of tension in Act 2, with all the trouble surrounding the Qunari reaching a boiling point, and this is such a great little break from all of that. Had Dragon Age 2 been made in the 2020s, this quest would have been titled Aveline Got No Riz, or something like that. Because while Donick is about as dense as I am when it comes to reading the signals of the fairer sex, Aveline is also absolutely useless at sending those signals out.
Micah, she's bad at this.
Oh, and you have to have Isabela in your party when all this is going down, because she is just hilarious.
Wait, you've gone 4 years without. You must creak like a rusty hinge.
She tries giving Donick cushy patrols, only to have him think he's being punished. She co-opts Hawk & Co. into getting him drunk so she can open up to him, and completely neglects to down some Dutch courage of her own before getting cold feet and running out. Probably leaving Donick wondering if Hawk was the one trying to hit on him. I mean, look, you're a nice guy, but you're more of a gym and barbecue kind of friend than a romance option. Maybe if you were a little more...
It is time for me to move on. Unless you'd care to get to know each other better, champion.
If only we had time, baby. If only we had time. But what I love is how, when the penny finally drops, Donick just marches up to the front door of Aveline's office and is all like, I can take it from here, bro. And then just walks in there and makes her his woman. What an absolute giga chad. And speaking of adorable couples...
That night, I can't stop thinking about it.
Well, then I'll see you later.
That was direct.
Thought I'd get straight to the point. Were you expecting flowers or something?
Don't be absurd.
Then I'll see you tonight.
Isabela is a pirate with a heart of gold and blades that I have no doubt have deprived more than one man of his family jewels. She can be blinded by treasure and the call of the open sea for sure, but to quote another pirate,
"Not all treasure is silver and gold, mate."
We first meet her in the Pearl in Dragon Age Origins. They rework her design quite a lot for this one though, but I really do like it a lot more. In Origins, she was just a rogue in the same light armor all rogues wore, but a great deal of effort has been put into her design here, and everything from her choice of clothes to the stud in her bottom lip says something about her. The Pearl is a house of ill repute, and we find her there engaged in a fight with several enemies that she fends off easily enough. Her point in that game is to let the player unlock the duelist speciality for rogues, and dueling is exactly how she winds up as a regular party member and helping hand all through this game. We meet her in the Hanged Man, which is Varric's watering hole of choice too. Every fantasy RPG needs a good tavern to start a quest or two in, and Dragon Age 2 is no exception there. Isabela makes her entrance when we see her settling up with some informants who apparently had no information worth a damn, and we are more than impressed with her talents. Her opening quest sets the scene for what she's dealing with down the line. As Varric explains in the narration at the start of this chapter, a powerful storm shipwrecked a lot of people, including a Qunari dreadnought containing some 200 to 300 warriors and an Arishok. Isabela's ship was one of those that went down in the storm. In the process, she lost a powerful ancient relic that she was smuggling for an Antivan crime lord named Castilion. The promiscuous pirate was already in the guy's bad books after she agreed to escort one of his cargo ships, only to later discover it contained 200 slaves. These people were Fereldans who had been trying to escape the Blight and trusted the wrong man to get them to safety. Being possessed of a much bigger conscience than she likes to let on, she allowed the slaves to escape and got her first black mark against her from this piece of work. So basically, we go to the Chantry where she has a duel scheduled to try to get Castilion's men off her back. Our job is to make sure that the thugs in question abide by the rules, and when they inevitably don't, we get down and dirty with these guys. This convinces Isabela that she's in good company, and makes her available to work for us from then on. Now, there's quite a bit more to say about her story arc, but it'll come up when we discuss the climax of Act 2. Isabela is fiery and passionate, and it's easy to see how she and Fenris could be drawn to each other. They're both direct people who wear their hearts on their sleeves. They both have people chasing after them. They both despise slavery. However, where Fenris is distrustful of mages, Isabela is sympathetic. She believes everyone should be free. Pro-mage sentiment around Fenris will harbour rivalry, while it will deepen Isabela's friendship. A quest in Act 2 will see us venturing into the Fade with a couple of allies to help a boy who's something of a unique case even for mages. We've dealt with young mages who've been unwittingly tempted by demons before, but the potential power in this one has world-shattering potential. I took Isabela into the Fade with me, and she was easily seduced by the promise of a new ship and the lore of the open sea. It's not something that can be prevented, as it's hardwired into the quest to force you into fighting a pride demon with only 2 party members. Like all sailors, the call of the open sea is nigh on irresistible to her. And while she's certainly putting on a brave face about her current landbound situation, she's clearly hurting for being trapped here. However, we also need to call back to an article called The Oral History of Dragon Age that was published on The Gamer's website in 2021. Here, writer Daniel Eriksson had this to say: I made a number of suggestions for style guide approaches, and became the enforcer of those rules. No in-jokes, no fourth wall breaking, and so on. I firmly believe top tier IP is borrowed from, it doesn't borrow. Indiana Jones doesn't make Star Wars references. Dragon Age has lightened up since my time, but when I first played Dragon Age 2 and Isabela said, I like big boats and I cannot lie, I had to put the game down for weeks until I could forgive it. We know that EA was already tightening the screws on BioWare, but most of the writing staff here were people from the first game, and David Gaider had a lot of trust in them. He said in his own interview, everyone on the team had been on Dragon Age Origins, so they were all veterans. Gaider recounts, I sat down with them near the beginning and said, we're going to have very little time to review all of this. I'll be lucky if I get to review your stuff, never mind other people's. So I'm going to trust you. We're going to measure twice, cut once. Once it's cut, it's done, and we'll just have to accept the result. So I think we can see this as just having a little fun, and the result of the tight schedule under which the game was made. Trust me, it's not even the most egregious choice made in this game. I don't have a great deal to say about Sebastian. We talked in the last video about how Shale was a Day 1 DLC character made to combat the terrors of
second-hand video game sales.
Well, that's kind of his gig too. The Exiled Prince was free DLC to anyone who bought the game's signature edition, and everyone else had to pay extra for it. However, Shale feels really integrated into Dragon Age Origins, while Sebastian honestly feels like an afterthought. I will say there is a personal bias at play here. Shale is a near permanent fixture in my Origins party setup, while I only really hung out with Sebastian for his specific quest lines. That means I got to hear more of Shale's banter with the other characters, and that may have made her seem more integrated in my mind as a result. On the other hand, David Gaider mentions that he was something of a late addition to the character roster, which is part of the reason he's the only character that can't be romanced by both male and female Hawks. Sebastian doesn't even become a full party member until the second Act 2, which contributes further to this sense that he was bolted onto the story much later. But there are a couple of cool things that happen with him in the third act that we'll get to later. The problem with Sebastian is he's a rogue archer, and we've already got one of those, and one who's a damn sight more charismatic at that. That's not to say that voice actor Alec Newman, whose credits include the protagonist of Crimson Desert, so good on him. That game looks like a bucket load of fun, and I might have to take a crack at it when my schedule clears up later in the year. Where was I? Oh yeah, that's not to say he isn't giving a great performance, it's just he doesn't have a lot to work with here. The Exiled Prince begins when we catch wind of an argument happening at the Chanter's Board between Kirkwall's Grand Cleric and a lay brother of the Chantry who's far too cool and over-designed to be anything other than a companion or a late-game boss. Sebastian is putting a contract out for the heads of a mercenary group called Flint Company, who murdered his whole family back in the city of Starkhaven. This is a city that we haven't been properly introduced to yet, but it's another place in the Free Marches that's on a similar power level to Kirkwall. As to why the entire family of a Chantry monk would become the target of a private military contractor, well, it's because Sebastian here is royalty. He's the unwanted delinquent son of the Starkhaven royal family who was thrust into the Chantry to stop him disgracing their name, and eventually found his peace and his faith thanks to Kirkwall's Grand Cleric, Althena. As a monk, things like wealth, station, and worldly desires ought to be beneath him, but this isn't just revenge. It's also a preemptive strike against a group that most likely have him on their radar too. I've read plenty of fantasy stories where the bastard thrown-away child of royalty becomes the figurehead of an anti-royalist movement. This one is pretty good actually, even gets a little cosmic horror by the end. Sebastian's quest for revenge and possibly his return to Starkhaven to take his throne flies in the face of his Chantry vows, and while he is faithful and can generally be found within the Chantry talking to the Grand Cleric, he's now walking a path that's somewhat antithetical to that life. Also, hanging out with no less than 3 apostate mages, a smuggler, a guy with serious anger management issues, and an opportunist isn't going to look too good on his resume either. I guess befriending the captain of the guard looks okay though. In Act 2, Sebastian discovers that the Flint Company was actually hired by the Harriman family, who've also installed a puppet king that they can manipulate from the shadows. The Harrimans are supposed to be allies to Sebastian's family, so this is a notable betrayal. What I like about this quest is it shows the dangers of demons and blood magic in a more subtle way. We find Malefica's drunk on power with so much frequency in this game that it's a wonder they don't have their own clubhouse complete with weekly D&D sessions. But it's a little different here. Entering the Cookie Cutter Mansion. Yeah, they made one and then just rejigged it a little for the multiple mansion-based quests we have to deal with. We find most of the residents in a state that could be considered not entirely in touch with reality, and heading down some very dark roads. As such, it isn't all that difficult to figure out what happened here. In the basement of the house, we actually find tunnels extending down into some ancient ruin that probably dates back to when this place was under Tevinter control. Lady Harriman, we discover, is a powerful apostate mage, and is in communion with a desire demon. Unlike the others though, she at least seems, on the surface, to be in control of her faculties. In previous encounters, we've seen desire demons use illusions and other methods of seduction to rapidly win people over into their control, but in this case, the demon played on Lady Harriman's hubris. As a mage, she thought she was too powerful, too smart, and too educated to be caught in a demonic trap. And it was that pride that actually made her truly vulnerable. This demon didn't employ the same brute force tactics we've seen others employ. It simply made itself useful, kept the conversation going, and subtly found the lady's desires and oh so gently fanned the flames of them. The act was so subtle that when deceitful ideas arose in Lady Harriman's mind, they seemed entirely like her own. Which, in a way, they were. Just fan the ambition a little here, lower her inhibitions there, twist her morality just a few degrees, and allow her to make her own excuses for her actions. Let her weave her own narrative about how it's for the better, and it's what she really deserves. Let her walk willingly, step by step, across each line of her own free will, and then throw in a little sunk cost fallacy, until sacrificing her own family members to this thing seems like a regrettable, but perfectly reasonable thing for her to do in exchange for more power. And after she's done it once, where's the harm in doing it again? And again. And again. The best scams work this way. Cults and other radicalized ideologies and even abusive partners prey on various insecurities and weaknesses present in all people. but the belief that you're just too damn smart to be caught out leaves a back door wide open for them to walk through and take advantage of you. And then by the time you've realized what a horrific situation you've arrived in, and how complicit you were in getting there, it's already too late. So that's Sebastian. In fact, that's most of our team. But I've saved the best for last, the Dragon Age icon, and one of the driving forces behind our story. So let's meet Varric, and go and find some red lyrium. Varric Tethras is a surface dwarf who was born in Kirkwall. Having never lived in Orzammar, he does not consider that world or their culture to be his. His family, however, were once part of the noble caste. That is until his father was caught rigging proving matches and disgraced. With little left to live for beneath the surface, Varric's father moved the family above ground, where they became connected with the Dwarven Merchants Guild, and began building their new life and empire. At this time, both Varric's parents are dead, and his older brother Bartrand is now the head of the family and responsible for all the big picture decisions. He's actually been incredibly successful as a businessman, and more than doubled his family's wealth and power since he took over. It could be argued, however, that Varric is the real power behind his success. While on the surface he may just seem like an idle younger brother, indulging himself on his sibling's success by drinking and telling tall tales in taverns, Varric actually runs a spy and informant network that keeps him up to date with everyone, from highest nobility all the way to dealings in the darkest corners of Kirkwall. His carefree persona makes him easy to overlook and underestimate. However, that can leave people very vulnerable. His role as the House Informant is exactly what brought talk of a promising apostate mage making waves in the world of smuggling, and led him to believe that this is exactly the kind of person that Bartrand needs for his Deep Roads expedition. In a way, Varric is the Garrus of Dragon Age. The effect is somewhat diminished by having a different protagonist to play in each game, and he's not quite as fetishized as the ultimate alien boyfriend, but he's a point of familiarity in every Dragon Age. Someone the player knows they can trust even if the character doesn't, and Brian Bloom, I knew I recognized that name. He's also the New Order's BJ Blazkowicz. He's doing an awesome job with Varric's charm and snark. Varric is responsible for creating the champion of Kirkwall. After all, many a hero has slain many a dragon atop many a mountain, but without bards, wordsmiths, and, well, let's be honest here, bullshit artists to weave the events into a tale, no one would know who these people are. Something similar happens in Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind. The hero in this story started out his life as a performer with a travelling theatre group, and while he certainly leads an extraordinary life, he uses plenty of theatre tricks and even starts rumours about himself to inflate his legend. There's also the fact that he's still the one narrating this true version of his life story, and we only have his word to go off that he isn't embellishing it this time. And we could say the same for Varric here too. We find Varric inflating the size of our, legend in The Hanged Man on more than one occasion.
Don't the stories mention my stunning good looks? What about my cunning wit?
And he even goes on to publish a book about it, which is actually how he winds up in Cassandra's care at the start of the game. Varric's signature weapon is a one-of-a-kind repeating crossbow named Bianca. This mechanical wonder came into Varric's possession somehow. He will actually present multiple variations of the story of how he got her throughout the games he's in, and he's even more cagey about the story surrounding her name, implying it's one story he'll never tell. Perhaps he's hoping people's imaginations will get carried away with them, and they'll start imagining and spreading their own stories about his crossbow. The end of Act 1 sees Hawk and co. get together the 50 sovereigns needed to buy their way into the expedition to the Deep Roads, and leaves us staring down choices that will have far-reaching consequences for later in the game. The most important of these is, who are we going to take on this adventure? Hawk's mother doesn't want both of her sons to simply walk into the Deep Roads and never return, but Carver insists that he's going. He's done being a side character in his brother's story, and wants to make something for himself. In truth, whatever choice you make, He's not going to be available as a regular party member after this. Despite Mother Dearest's worries, I sided with Carver. We had both, after all, put this whole scheme together, and it was only fair he got to come along. The expedition actually goes well at the start, and reaches a dwarven thaig that seems to be older than any that's been explored before. After doing a brief side quest to help Sandal, not that he needs any help against Darkspawn, we eventually stumble into a vault containing a unique idol that seems to be crafted entirely out of lyrium. This alone would easily be worth a king's bounty, and we see something shift inside Bartrand once he gets his hands on it. This leads to him sealing up the room with us in it to die. Bartrand has never been shown in a particularly good light at any point in the game so far, so the idea that he could betray his fellow investors for a bigger slice of the takings seems logical, but the fact he's willing to abandon his brother as well implies something darker at play. Of course, the heroes make a harrowing escape. They venture further into the deep roads in the hope of finding a passage that loops back around to the other side and fight various angry spirits and demons along the way. While they do succeed in finding their way back to where the expedition was camped, Carver is far from well. The party had to battle Darkspawn in the deep roads, and the taint of their corrupted blood has gotten into Carver just like it did Wesley. There is no cure for this, and Carver is staring down a painful end beneath the surface unless you've brought Anders along with you. Anders is a Grey Warden, and the closest thing that exists to a cure for the taint is the Grey Warden's joining ritual. Of course, Carver may not survive, and even if he does, he only gets about 30 years before he succumbs to the corruption, but it's the best chance that he has. So, Anders uses his own taint to try and sense out other Grey Wardens, and as luck would have it, he finds a patrol that's relatively close. They take Carver and, yes, they save him in the end, but he belongs to the Wardens now, and Grey Wardens don't get to go home. In a way, Carver got exactly what he wanted. The Wardens aren't heroes because, unless there's a blight, no one has any idea what they're doing. No one wants to know. If they knew, it's unlikely they'd sleep at all. But this way, he gets to escape his brother's shadow and the trappings of his mother's old life, and begin writing a story that's his own, and who knows how that will turn out in the end. Incidentally, if you don't take Carver with you, he decides to join the Templars in Kirkwall, and I can't imagine Christmas lunch is very fun with a Templar and apostate sitting across from each other. As for Hawke though, he finds his fortune and buys his mother's old estate. They re-establish themselves in Hightown, and a few years later, he gets drawn into a lot of trouble with the Qunari. We talked somewhat about the Qunari and the Qun in the last video with regards to Sten, and I'll try to avoid retreading the same ground too much here so we can get into the stuff that's specifically introduced in this game. Basically, the Qun is a somewhat convoluted philosophy that forms the basis for this kind of collectivist society that the majority of these horned giants belong to. The key points are, a Qunari is anyone of any species that submits to the Qun and operates within Qunari society. Qunari are assigned a role within that society and are expected to conform to it. Personal ambitions and desires have no place in the Qun. Everybody plays their role in the service of the greater society, and the society takes care of everyone within it in return. We can go back and forth on the pros and cons of this way of life, compared to Ferelden's more individualistic society with Sten all we want in the first game, but he can find just as many flaws with Ferelden's way as we can with his. It's a great look at the difference between regular and normal, and understanding that just because we do things a certain way in our society, doesn't mean that that's the only way, or indeed the right way to do it. Seriously. Go and live in a foreign country for a year. Ideally one where you have to learn a new language to operate. I can assure you that you'll be asking just as many questions about your own society by the end, as you were about theirs when you first arrived. Sten, however, was just one Qunari on a mission in Ferelden. While he certainly had opinions about the culture there, it wasn't his job to do anything about it, and he really wouldn't have gotten very far had he tried. What we see in Dragon Age 2 though is some 200 to 300 warriors led by an Arishok, all existing in an annex in the Kirkwall docks for far longer than anyone expected them to be. As such, tensions begin to rise between two cultures that at their heart are antithetical to each other. I said in the Origins video how I could understand the appeal of Qunari society, and how, if I wasn't especially unhappy with my role there, I could see being content within this society that looks out for everyone. But what if I wasn't happy with my role? What if, despite everything I'd been indoctrinated with from birth to view as virtuous and morally good, I found myself dissatisfied with my lot? What if I just wanted to travel and see what the world was like beyond the Qun? Gain a greater understanding of the lives that others live, or even just live a life on my own terms rather than those set out by the Qun? Then what? Well, this is where things start to seem less idealistic, and a tad more cultish. Things with the Qunari begin in Act 1, when we encounter a dwarf out along the coast who's gotten himself in a little over his head. We discover that he's an enterprising member of the Guild of Merchants who's looking to get his hands on the Qunari Gatlock, which is basically gunpowder. The Arishok isn't even willing to come to the negotiation table with this dwarf, viewing him with even more disdain than the traitorous Tel-Vashoth. So, a Tel-Vashoth is a Qunari who chooses to leave the Qun. Doing so isn't exactly an instant death penalty, but anyone looking to leave the Qun needs to get as far away as possible from any other Qunari as quickly as possible, lest they get dragged before one of their priests for re-education, or in some cases, much worse than that. Actually escaping comes with its own set of problems though. Most Qunari are born into the Qun and raised from birth with its values. They are taught very little of the world outside of the Qun, and view other societies with disdain, especially Tevinter Magisters with whom they've been at war for some considerable time. So to leave the Qun, a Qunari has to sever ties with all of their family and friends, leave the only home they've ever known, and enter societies that they've been programmed to view with anything from disgust to outright hatred. This means they aren't really part of any world. They want the freedom to choose their own role that an individualistic society like Ferelden would offer, but they also want the perceived order, stability, and sense of purpose that being part of the Qun grants them. The Qun also stigmatizes selling services for coin, even more so than simply falling to the chaos of something like banditry. This means that Tel-Vashoth are just as, if not more likely to become criminals than mercenaries, which is exactly what the group in the immediate area has taken to. We take up the offer to help him, and after getting a warning from this Tel-Vashoth, who basically realized he has even less stomach for banditry than he did the Qun, and will now go on to sell his sword and his soul for coin as a mercenary, we get to work taking out these Tel-Vashoth. We report back to the Arishok, and this is a moment for Fenris to shine if you have him in your party.
Ari Shokost, Maras Shokra, Anan Isamkun.
The Qun from an elf? The madness of this place.
Negotiations, however, end rather abruptly. While the Qunari never leave a debt unsettled, the Arishok makes it abundantly clear that no deal was made, and that this dwarf actually inserted himself needlessly into his business. Even so, he's moderately impressed with Hawk and his band for their competence, and we have the opportunity to question him further once the offending dwarf has been removed from the annex. The Arishok is absolutely disgusted with the level of chaos and disorder he finds here. The Qunari have tried converting other nations by force in the past, and that hasn't exactly worked out for them. However, since they see the triumph of the Qun as an inevitability, they feel they can be patient. But the Arishok is already growing restless, far from his home and surrounded by what he perceives as filth, and it could only be a matter of time before he feels the Qun demands he take action. I want to pause here and say just how much I love the look of the Arishok as well. In both Origins and this game, you can really see which characters got the money spent on them, and which were patched together using the game's character creator. Duncan, for example, is a one-of-a-kind head and facial texture in Origins, while the Arishok just looks spectacular. Horns were always part of the Qunari design, but apparently, Engine limitations led to them being left out in the first game. They wanted Sten to be able to wear helmets, and they didn't want to have to model special versions of all of them just for him. But then, why would Ferelden helmets be fitted to horns anyway? Just give him a special headbutt attack that compensates for the loss of his armor class that not wearing a helmet would invoke. Simple. Another Act 1 Qunari-based mission brings us face to face with how the Qun deal with their mages. If you think the Chantry and the Circle are strict, you ain't seen nothing yet. This quest begins when an evil sister of the Chantry named Patrice approaches us. We know she's evil because she has short hair, too much eyeliner, and a permanent case of resting bitch face. She's looking for deniable assets to help get what she considers to be a Qunari mage, or Saarebas, out of the city. As a good and merciful sister of the Chantry, she looks upon this creature that is chained and collared with its lips sewn shut as something in need of liberation from a vile, oppressive culture, and she wants us to get him out of the city. She offers no suggestions on where he should go or what he should do once he's out of the city, and seems to think that someone who has only known submission for their entire existence will somehow be able to find their way in a world they know nothing about. To say nothing of the fact that her own people hunt down and kill apostate mages who aren't Qunari runaways. What do you think they'll do when this guy staggers into a village, they freak out, and he reacts the only way he knows how?
It's the bloody Templars. You know how it is. They don't see us as people. They don't care that Carl was someone's son, someone's lover.
Taking on this challenge sees us battling slavers and bandits who occupy tunnels beneath the city. When Hawk is threatened by enemies, the seemingly docile creature wakes up. The quest climaxes on a beach far from the city. Here we encounter a group of Qunari investigating the death of their kin at the hands of Tal Vashoth. By some startling coincidence, their bodies have all wound up at the exact spot where we emerge, almost like someone orchestrated this whole thing. But this is where things get interesting. The Qunari aren't immediately hostile. They simply want to take back their mage and deal with him according to their ways. So first, collared and leashed mages are another reference to the Wheel of Time. In the second book, The Great Hunt, we encounter the Xianqian people for the first time and learn about the Adam Collars. Female channelers, males just being murdered on sight, are collared and bound to a trainer who can inflict unimaginable pain upon them through the leash. The pain doesn't leave any physical trauma, meaning there is almost no limit to what the collared mage, or damane, can be subjected to. This is all in service of breaking their spirits utterly and turning them into perfectly obedient slaves. The collars of the Saarebas are somewhat more elaborate and would win them a lot of respect at a black metal festival, but they can contain their magic and inflict pain on them via a control rod if necessary. They are generally forbidden to speak as well, as Saarebas can't even be sure if the words they speak are their own, or that of a demon speaking through them. What's different with the Damane in the Wheel of Time and the Saarebas in Dragon Age is that it's not the threat of torment or punishment that controls the Saarebas. As we see when Hawk challenges the Qunari, what controls them is the Qun.
Saarebas, show that your will remains bound to the Qun.
This is pretty interesting. While what the Saarebas endure seems horrific, it's only an extension of what all Qunari endure. The Saarebas have a role, and they submit to that role the same as any other Qunari. Within the Qun, there are those who see the Saarebas as making the ultimate act of selflessness, which for a Qunari is viewed as the highest of all virtues. The conversation ended abruptly for me when I broke the first rule of being an apostate and just told the Qunari that I like to sling fireballs from time to time. It is just so hard for me to believe that Hawk is even trying to hide his mage nature when he's walking around with a skull-topped staff on his back and wearing robes all the time. The reaction to talking to another mage is volatile, even fearful, and the Qunari attack. When the battle is over, we have a chance to free our Saarebas and let him speak for himself. And it turns out, what he wants is...
I do not want to die. I want to live by the Qun.
Which means dying.
Yes. Is that hard to grasp?
I mean, yes, this is absolutely indoctrination, but it's also the only life he's ever known. Outside the Qun, he has no purpose, and no one who could possibly understand him in any way. Maybe in some ideal world, there's a story where he can find his own way and achieve true self-actualization. But that isn't this world, and he submits himself to the Qun and what he sees as the only virtuous option. Now, I haven't exactly expressed a lot of pro-Chantry sentiment in either this or the previous video, but their treatment of mages is hands down better than the Qunari. The Qunari assert total control over their mages to remove the danger of demons and seem completely terrified of a mage that lives free. Oh, you mean just like the Templars with apostates and hedge mages like Morrigan? Only partly. At the heart of it all, the Circle, in its idealistic state, is a place of learning and acquiring knowledge to dispel ignorance. It exists as a place to protect mages from demons and abominations just as much as anyone else. It actually makes a lot of sense for a Templar to act cold and dispassionate towards a mage, even as they use their magic to heal their wounds, because one day it could be that Templar's responsibility to put down the same mage to save thousands of innocent lives from demonic forces. Within the Circle, elder, well-trained mages teach younger, more vulnerable mages how to guard their dreams and their hearts. They even pit their trainees against an actual demon in the Fade during the harrowing. The purpose of this trial by fire is so that mages can see that they can fight back. They don't have to be afraid of their power, or view it as a curse or something to be feared. It's a gift that lets them grow in ways they never imagined possible. The Circle also studies and develops magic. There are multiple schools of arcane knowledge within the Circle. A Saarebas might be adept at blowing things up, but a Circle mage can heal wounds and bring soldiers back from the very brink of death. They can defend themselves from attacks and restrain enemies without ever harming them. The system isn't perfect by any means, of course. While they've clearly achieved much more than the Qunari, I've already mentioned the abundance of blood mages that we encounter in this game alone, to say nothing of what happened to the Ferelden Circle during the last Blight. A lot happens in Act 2 for our companions, some of which we've already talked about with Aveline's romance shenanigans, Merrill's attempt to fix her mirror, and Sebastian finding the real culprits of his family's assassination. However, we also have Fenris tracking down his old master's apprentice Hadriana, who is a truly spiteful blood mage. When she realizes that Fenris is coming for her, she uses her slaves as mere blood sacks to fuel her power. The twist of the knife at the end of this quest is the revelation that Fenris' sister is still alive and well, and Hadriana is willing to tell Fenris where she is. Remember, our early 2000s emo boy here has some memory problems. Fenris, so used to lies, deceit, and twisted power games from Magisters, sees no reason to put any stock in her words, and instead releases years of pent-up rage towards this woman upon her. Things take a turn for the worst with Anders too. After his all-too-traumatic encounter with a former friend and lover in the Chantry, his involvement with a covert mage underground has revealed to him that mages are being made tranquil at an alarming rate within the city, and a particular Templar named Sir Ulrich is petitioning to simply spiritually castrate the entire Circle. When we confront this guy, we find him using his position and the threat of Chantry retribution to engage in total psychopathy, and Justice does not like that one bit at all. In fact, this time around, Anders is almost unable to wrest control of his body from the powerful spirit of vengeance that resides within him. And while he just manages to prevent himself committing an atrocity all of his own, he has to face up to the inescapable fact that he has become an abomination. That justice is no longer justice. His friend is long gone, and a powerful spirit of vengeance now craves to use his body to enact its own will upon the world. His offer was made to Justice out of friendship and compassion, but neither of them were prepared for the consequences of such a dangerous action. It shows that even well-intentioned mages and spirits can fall into darkness and chaos and arrive at a place where no amount of good intentions can save them. Then there's Varric and Bartrand's joyful reunion. One that sees Varric single-handedly kick down the door to his brother's mansion and slay a small army of guards before having his brother fall at his knees and...
Give me my brother. I was just jealous of you. How could I ever compete with you for Mother's love?
You're strong and handsome, and so very smart. What?
Why lie now about this? What have you to gain?
Yeah, this is total bullshit. The truth shows us that Bartrand has all but lost his mind at this point, and the cause seems to be the Lyrium Idol. What we hear from Bartrand's servants is that he was hearing voices and some kind of song from the idol that persisted even after he sold the damn thing. This led to his mind further degenerating and him committing the horrible things we find in his home. It seems that we actually dodged a hell of a bullet by getting locked up in the deep roads by him. We'll get to Isabela later, but first we need to talk specifically about Hawke, because unfortunately for our protagonist, he also suffers another personal tragedy in this act. The seeds of this are sown in the first act, when we are tasked with tracking down the wife of a gentleman in Hightown named Gaslan de Carrick. Given his wife's open dissatisfaction with her husband, and her nightly adventures into the Blooming Rose to, make use of the services there, no one seems to think there's anything suspicious about her disappearance. Or if anyone is suspect, then it's him. The climax of this adventure seems like an encounter with just another blood mage, one of many using the blood of the citizens of Kirkwall to enact dark magics. While we find the body of the missing wife, we fail to bring down the killer and hear nothing of him again for a long time. That is until Act 2, when a Templar called Emmerich approaches and starts making life difficult for the guards by insisting that there is some kind of serial killer at large in the city. This quest has a few twists and turns, but the pattern that we discover is that a mysterious stranger approaches women who are somewhat senior in their years and gives them white lilies as a token of his affection. He courts them for a while before drawing them to a remote location, at which point, they are never seen again. I was checking in with Hawke's mother quite regularly for new conversation options, and was all gung-ho on her going out and finding a new husband when she suggested it. It never even occurred to me at the time that she might put herself directly in the line of fire, which is exactly what happens.
Your mother didn't show up for our weekly visit. Is she ill? She is here, isn't she?
There's something so heartbreaking about this quest. We're supposed to be recounting the story of a hero, a legend no less, and heroes are always supposed to arrive just in time. They're not meant to arrive too late, and the sheer morbid horror of what befalls Leandra just makes it even worse. Oddly enough, David Gader mentions that this whole section was kind of a dare that almost didn't make the final cut of the game. He just threw the idea on the table as a joke, and another writer happened to like it so much that she ran with it. Essentially, Hawke's mother has been Frankenstein together, along with parts of the other victims of this madman, to create an absurd copy of his dead wife. We've had encounters with blood mages and necromancy all through this game, that leads one to see sense in both the Templars and the Circle, and possibly even ask if they're doing enough. But this is not only utterly vile, but it's deeply personal, and given everything that's soon going to happen between the Templars and the mages, it makes you seriously question which side you'll take when the bombs start falling. But first, we've got some Qunari to take care of. The escalation of hostilities with the Qunari can seem a little one-sided if you aren't paying attention.
The Qunari were blameless.
Sister Patrice and her Templar bodyguard are absolutely stirring up as much hate within the populace as she can, and even going so far as to kidnap and murder a Qunari delegation, and you can see they're really riling up the people here, playing on their fear, suspicion and ignorance of these strangers from a faraway land, who just hold different values to theirs. Even so, we can't exactly say that the Qunari were just minding their own business the whole time, and were forced into the actions they took at the end of this act. Not by a long shot. Early in Act 2, Hawke is requested, by name no less, to speak with the Arishok. It seems he's managed to earn at least a small amount of respect from the Qunari leader, in part through his conduct in their earlier meeting, and part through how he changed his fortune. While he's there, he's told that someone recently attempted to steal the Gatlock explosive powder from their compound, but instead made off with something quite a bit more dangerous. Since their arrival in Kirkwall, multiple attempts have been made to steal this secret from the Qunari, and this time, they deliberately switched out their explosive powder for a dangerous chemical weapon that distorts the minds of the people who inhale it, and makes them hallucinate and become very violent. If produced and distributed throughout Kirkwall in large quantities, it could cause untold devastation to the entire city. This setup was to create a kind of ironic punishment that would dissuade other potential criminals from trying to steal the secrets. However, the Arishok has had a sudden change of heart about this. He believes the thief to be the dwarf from our previous encounter, and that it's more likely this opportunistic businessman will seek to sell his prize for a high price without actually checking what it is first. As such, there could be a considerably larger fallout from this plan than intended. The Arishok thinks that Hawke will want to hunt this dwarf before that happens, and acts like he's doing him a favour and an honour by enlisting him to take care of this. Like, okay Chief, you mean to tell me that you were all just hanging around here for way longer than necessary, while complaining about all the so-called filth you see all around you, and hiding the fact that you have a very dangerous chemical weapon in your compound? Because let's be real here, there's no way you declared that to the guards and the Templars when you checked in, and they just let you keep it. Then you concocted a scheme to have that weapon stolen, and now you're offloading all the potential devastating consequences onto my shoulders, and calling it a favour to me? In the climax of this quest, we discover it's not the dwarf who's responsible, but elves cooperating with human agitators. No need to guess who's pulling their strings. Who stole the gas and released it into the city. But why would they do that, you ask? Well, it would seem that in the last 3 years, a lot of elves in the alienage have started converting to the Qun. City elves have every right to feel dissatisfied with their lot. They are the lowest rank of citizen within the human cities that they inhabit. They are systematically kept poor and in a constant survival state, while they are denied access to justice, as we see first in the City Elf origin story and several quests in this game. And they're also used as scapegoats for any problems that could challenge the ruling class and their oh so precious status quo, to say nothing of what befell them historically to put them in this situation to begin with. Given how hard their lives are, how unsatisfying their work is, and how it barely puts food in their bellies, how demonized they are and how poorly they are treated, how could life in the Qun be any worse for them? What's that? They might get assigned the role of toilet cleaner? That's basically what they do now anyway. The difference is, in human society, they'll barely be paid for their efforts and spat on for smelling so bad, while in the Qun, they'll be valued for their contributions to the society. They'll be fed the same as everyone else, and protected equally by the Qun's law. They won't be judged for the race they were born into, but for their actions and contributions to their society. Why wouldn't they sign up? To some though, this is seen as a second fall from grace. The elves have already lost so much of their history and culture to Tevinter Magisters and the Chantry, and now they are abandoning what little they have left to submit to a foreign culture. Officially, the Qunari don't preach the Qun. They're actually quite reluctant to talk about the totality of it, as even their leaders are only versed in those parts that help them to perform their duties as best they can. So while they aren't aggressively looking to convert anyone, they'll answer questions of those souls who wander their way with open eyes and ears, at which point they simply see it as the truth of the Qun becoming self-evident. So on one hand, you can't say that the Qunari are converting anyone, but on the other hand, they aren't even supposed to be in Kirkwall at all. They were offered shelter after their ships were destroyed in a storm, and seem to have long overstayed their welcome. Their compound isn't an embassy, They aren't here to share in an exchange of ideas or culture, so taking in anyone, even those who come freely, could be considered an overstep. And maybe it is, except that nobody cares. No one cares about the elves. They're just degenerate drains on the city's resources anyway. Let the Qunari have them. Let them be their problem from now on. What about those Ferelden's? They came to Kirkwall on boats and started demanding handouts. Now they work in the mines, doing for a copper what my grandfather used to do for a silver. Of course, I suppose we could blame the mine owner for only offering coppers when he absolutely can afford to pay silvers, or maybe the city's nobles, who'd rather make the Ferelden's life so unbearable and desperate that they have to take those low-paying jobs, than part with even a fraction of their fortunes to help them integrate and become truly productive members of their society. No, to hell with it. Let the Qunari have them too. I bet they were exaggerating that whole blight thing anyway. There's no way we Kirkwallers would ever abandon our homes like that. Nobody cares, right up to the point that all those disenfranchised people start to resemble something like an army. And until this problem with people going over to the Qun actually affects somebody with wealth and power. We actually encounter the Viscount's son in proximity to Qunari on a couple of occasions. Seamus Dumar is a man who wasn't exactly born into a gilded cage, but has lived in one from a very young age. After his father became Viscount of all of Kirkwall, his whole identity became the Viscount's son. I know that among what we've seen of the suffering of the elves and the Ferelden refugees, and all the atrocities committed by both mages and Templars in this game, it might seem hard to sympathize with someone whose biggest problem is that he was raised in a life of privilege. But a comfortable prison is still a prison, and I can certainly see how Seamus is dissatisfied with his lot, and might start looking to other cultures to find purpose and meaning in his life. I mean, it's not like anyone in the real world, who didn't feel like they fit in with the culture they were born into, went on to romanticize another culture that they only knew about from books or comics and media, and decided, screw it, I'm gonna go live there. While we could drill down deeper into this, the only thing we need to know for now is that Seamus eventually decides to join the Qun, and Sister Patrice sees her opportunity to truly vilify the Qunari in the eyes of the Viscount. And while this doesn't exactly go the way she wants it to, it does finally light the fuse on where all this has been going. Central to the main conflict of Act 2 is Isabela. Remember how our landlocked pirate told us this?
Where's the relic?
I lost it. Castellan's just going to have to...
Well, the Qunari showed up during the same storm as she did, and the reason they've actually stuck around for over 3 years, despite their leader's obvious disdain for the culture that offered him shelter within their walls, is...
We are all denied Parvolin until I alone recover what was lost under my command.
It could be a coincidence, I guess. This is the Age of the Dragon after all. Ancient relics are practically falling out of the sky here. But then there's Isabela's behavior every time we visit the Qunari.
You go ahead. I have something I should do.
Nah, I'm sure it's nothing. So, yes, Isabela's relic and the Qunari relic are one and the same. It was being returned to them from the Olesians, and the Tevinter Imperium saw a chance to strike a symbolic blow against their long-term enemies by swiping it from right beneath their noses and taking it for themselves. They commissioned a smuggler in Antiva to intercept the ship and make off with the goods, and that smuggler just so happened to know a captain who owed him a big debt. One that she would be willing to do almost anything to get out from under. This is related to us during a fairly intense scene that sees both Aveline and Isabela arguing for our aid. According to Isabela's contacts, the relic has resurfaced and she needs our help to finally get it back, while Aveline needs Hawk to help convince the Arashok to hand over 2 elven fugitives who've ran to the Qunari to escape justice. While we don't actually know at first that the 2 missing relics are one and the same, it creates a big dilemma when it's finally brought to light. In order for Isabela to succeed at her mission, the Qunari must fail. In which case, who can say if they'll ever leave Kirkwall? And we can see that the Arashok is growing more and more agitated with Kirkwall society. how this goes down depends largely on your relationship with Isabela. Oh, she's going to take the damn thing and run, regardless of what you say to her during the mission, but a hawk who's taken time to befriend her, show her kindness and camaraderie, and quite possibly broken a few bedposts with her, might just be able to stir a hint of regret in that opportunistic heart of hers, and maybe inspire her to be a better person. The situation with the elves though, that's the real boiling point for the Qunari. In keeping with all the writing in this game so far, they have a side to this too. They're another couple of disenfranchised elves who got tired of living without access to justice for the wrongs committed upon them and their kind. So when a city guard forced himself on their sister and they were ignored, they took matters into their own hands before piecing out of Kirkwall society for good and gaining the protection of a lot of Qunari warriors. When we hear their story, the Arishok asks us,
"Tell me, Hawk, what would you do in my place?"
And things escalate quickly from there. It becomes clear very quickly that the Arishok has been planning this for a long time. This isn't some spur-of-the-moment rage-induced attack. It's a well-coordinated city-wide strike that cripples the response time for the guards and the Templars, and allows the smaller Qunari force to quickly gain the upper hand in the battle to control the city. With Kirkwall in flames, Qunari warriors spilling blood in the streets, and the guards unable to mount a strong defense against them, the nobles being rounded up and sent to the Chantry where they'll be forced to choose between submission to the Qun or death, Kirkwall calls out for someone. It asks that great question of, where have all the good men gone, and where are all the gods? It ponders on a streetwise Hercules to fight the rising odds. It laments the lack of a white knight upon a fiery steed. It needs someone strong, someone fast, someone fresh from the fight. Kirkwall needs a champion. What? No, really, what? But we aren't going to do this alone. Oh no, it's about time some of the things we set up earlier on have some payoff. The first of which is...
Somehow I knew it would be you.
Carver?
Yes, our little brother has very much grown up, and that Grey Warden armor fits him like a glove. He only shows up briefly here, but he'll be back. And if you think that was a dramatic entrance, you ain't seen nothing yet.
I am Knight Commander Meredith.
Oh, we are packing heat now. Meredith is willing to overlook Hawk's apostate status until the more immediate threat of the Qunari is handled, and we even link up with First Enchanter Orsino along the way, before we finally get to make our move on the Chantry, and indeed, the Arishok. It's certainly true that the Arishok's opinion of Kirkwall nobility and their supposed justice mirrors my own.
Look at you. Like fat doth Russie, you feed and complain only when your meal is interrupted. You do not look up. You do not see that the grass is bare. All you leave in your wake is misery.
But unfortunately, Bob, you aren't the world police, and you don't get to dictate how other cultures conduct themselves, and move in and lop off the heads of their leaders just because you don't like it. In truth, I don't really understand the Arishok's long game here. He can't go back to Parvalan. No other ships are coming to reinforce his position, and as defensible as Kirkwall is, he's out of his mind if he thinks he can hold it indefinitely with only a few hundred soldiers. Okay, he caught the guards and the Templars off guard with his initial assault, but what happens when they regroup along the wounded coast in all the caves they know about, from having lived in this area all their lives? How do they plan to stop them entering the city via all the smuggler tunnels they found in their years protecting it? The Qunari will be locked into a guerrilla war, and the mages who don't flee aren't going to submit to what the Qun demands of them, so they'll have magic to fight against too. All the while, the Chantry will be preparing an entire exalted march to take back Kirkwall. The best outcome for the Qunari here is the city is turned to ash after a lengthy siege. Even so, the fastest way to get rid of him now is to give him his damn relic, which...
I believe I can answer that. I'm sure you'll find it mostly undamaged.
I knew you'd come crawling back. And so the Arashok says he's done. He's willing to leave and wash his hands of this place forever, providing of course he can take Isabela back with him, so that she can submit to the Qun and their justice. Oh, what's that, big guy? You want us to respect your laws now? What was it you said to me when I asked you to turn over 2 criminals to our guards?
Tell me, Hawk, what would you do in my place?
She's with me, and I've just about had it with you. However, rather than continue the war, the Arashok challenges Hawk to mortal combat. I mean, a duel with Isabela as the prize, and I was more than happy to accept. The Arashok fight, though presented somewhat differently at the time, was used in the trailer, and I feel like most people who chose to be a mage did so in hope of acting that scene out again. Unfortunately, the sick-ass champion armor isn't available until the final act. The fight looks so cool in the pre-rendered trailer, but the reality of it is more... Okay, I'm exaggerating. However, if you are playing a mage, then going all in on support magic is going to leave you vulnerable here, and it's better to let Fenris handle the fight for you. You need damage and crowd control to keep out of his range and whittle down his health bar. It takes a while, but eventually, the final blow is struck, the Arashok is slain, his army leaves, and Kirkwall has a new champion.
The city has been saved!
Wow, that sure was a lot of fighting, huh? So I guess it's about time we talk about easily the worst feature of Dragon Age 2. Which is a shame because you probably spend more time doing this than any of the good stuff. Let's talk about the combat. If I had to sum up Dragon Age 2's combat in a single word, that word would be frustrating. If you gave me 2, I'd say very frustrating. Let's do our best to start on a high note before we get to complaining though. I'm not going to go over all the basics that were covered in the previous video, just the parts specific to this game. So first, the animations are all snappy and stylish and create a sense of immediate response to commands. Your warriors don't just jog up to enemies, pussyfoot around them for a moment and then begin their attack animation cycles. No, they anime the fuck in there and start messing things up. We already talked in the development section about how this was a goal to make the game more appealing to console players. I personally never had an issue with Dragon Age Origins animations, or the responsiveness of my team, and I can't really speak on behalf of console players, but I do like these new animations. They're punchy and stylish, and they are punctuated with powerful sound effects that help to play into the heroic power fantasy that we want from playing RPGs. Well, most of them anyway. Unfortunately, this is all cosmetic. Whether or not you'd call it an improvement is a matter of personal taste, but if it's an improvement, it's basically the only one. Everything else is just a massive downgrade. Back when the first game was in development, hitting that pause button and scooching around the battlefield to issue commands to your team was considered a non-negotiable, classic BioWare RPG staple that needed to be in there. Entire test builds were returned to the development team with the response, "We don't need to press the pause button in combat." And then, it was back to the drawing board. BioWare wanted players to be in command of the action, and created a system of programmable AI tactic slots for players to load out their team with, and battles that meant they had to micromanage. The first game also had a skycam to allow players to get a bird's eye view of the battlefield. This meant that all of the interior areas had to have removable roofs that could pop in and out of existence when needed. And basically, none of that is in the sequel. You can zoom out to a degree, but you can't get a full bird's eye view of the field. I'd say you can play 2/3 of this game just controlling your main character, and only briefly pausing to target a new enemy, or choose a space to drop an AoE attack. I actually had to proactively push myself to switch characters in battle, because I was recording footage for a video, and I didn't want to only have capture of Hawk fighting for the whole thing. But tactics are more or less out the window. Early on in the game, I was jumping around characters to see what they were up to, only to find all their talents on cooldown, and there was literally nothing I could do with them. I figured, well, you know, it's the early game, so they don't have a lot of talents to manage. But it stays exactly the same all the way through. I suppose you could go into their combat tactics and just yeet all of their AI to force a situation where you need to micromanage everything, but that would probably swing things too far the other way. In Origins, especially later in the game, where the enemy forces got bulkier and there were a variety of threats to juggle, I'd often stealth ahead with a rogue, pick out mages or archers who were going to be a big problem to get to once the combat was joined, and place my guy behind them ready to unleash stun attacks and poison daggers on them before they could become trouble. All of that is gone now, as stealth, even fully maxed out, is on a timer. You can't slip into the shadows and take a moment to scout out an encounter and plan your attack, as you'll pop back into visibility when the timer is up. It seems like stealth in this game only exists to get you out of trouble rather than helping you to get into it. This is a mostly irrelevant complaint, however, as almost every battle is a fucking ambush of one kind or another. You never get to pick the battleground. You're almost always just walking around and boom! They pop up all around you, and suddenly you're on the back foot, and there's no safe space to park your mages unless you do a very deliberate retreat from the area, taking damage every step of the way. And that's just the first wave. Oh yeah, enemy waves. What an utterly infuriating thing to deal with. As characters become more powerful, especially your mages, you start to develop strategies to get you out of trouble pretty quickly. You can drop paralysis glyphs, cause firestorms, repel groups of enemies that get too close, or tie up stronger foes in the crushing prison. It's pretty cool. For like, the first 2 waves. And then there's 5 more. Oh, and there's like an ogre in one wave, or a couple of rage demons that can just erupt out of the ground right in your midst. Wait, what if both those things happen at the same time? Yeah, and let's throw a Revenant at them as well. Hell, let's make it 2. All the while, your talents are on cooldown, and the only thing you can do is chug potions and wait. If you can't tell, just throwing more at the player isn't how you create interesting tactical fights that engage them and see them bringing all their skills and resources to bear on the problem. You could ration out your talents and spells per wave, but since you have no idea how many waves there are, even that is bound to fail eventually. How are my warriors supposed to protect my mages when waves pop in all around us, and it's entirely possible that when they do, my warrior's taunt ability is still on cooldown after the last wave? And how do you escalate a system like this? What separates an encounter at the start of the game from one at the end? Well, just add more waves and increase the health pools of enemies. That won't get boring, or make your character's powers feel weak and completely useless, right? And what does this even say about my character? I'm supposed to be playing some legendary badass. But it seems he isn't smart enough to spot multiple waves of Carter thugs or giant spiders hiding in an area in broad daylight. Even the Elder Dragon fight has stages where it flies out of reach of any attack and lets drakes and dragonlings swarm you from all angles, while it gets to pick you off with fireballs for free. We went from truly awesome dragon battles to this crap? The finisher isn't even an in-engine animation. The game just forces a cutscene to show Hawk finishing the damn thing off. Combat just becomes a slog. I recently managed to unlock all of my DLC after having problems with EA's bullshit launcher that nobody wants on their PC. Yo, EA, we all shop on Steam, we all want our game libraries there, and we don't need another launcher taking up hard drive space and memory, so bite the bullet and let them take their cut. Anyway, once it was unlocked, I thought I should actually try the DLCs, as I understand there's some crossover into Inquisition there. So I did, and wound up in a battle with some kind of arcane horror, and it just went on and on and on until I Alt F4'd out of the game, and decided I'd try again in about a decade. All of this smacks of the short development time and crunch that the game was made under. I said in my Origins video that by the end of Awakening it felt like they'd hit a limit of what they could do with the original battle system, and now they needed to take their community feedback and start reworking it from the ground up, and this is not that at all. So that's the combat. I will say that some of the later battles did require more micromanagement. The sheer volume of enemies meant I had to keep a closer eye on individual characters to make sure they were getting healed or using their talents effectively. But it is for the most part a slog. A long, frustrating slog. And while I love this story, it might very well be a deal-breaking slog when it comes time to replay. Act 3 is by far the shortest act in the game, and it had the most content cut from it. This serves to throw the primary conflict into sharper focus, but as the time constraints and crunch reached a breaking point at the studio, decisions were made to quickly tie up the game at the end, and these decisions don't make a whole lot of narrative sense. In the midst of the chaos that ensued after the death of the Viscount, Knight Commander Meredith inserted herself into the power vacuum and basically took over the city. This was supposed to be a temporary band-aid solution until order was restored and a new Viscount could be chosen, but she's been holding on to the seat of power for about 3 years, and is now using her unchallenged authority to further encroach upon the rights of the mages in the Circle. As such, First Enchanter Orsino is now publicly speaking out against her. His ideas have the backing of the Kirkwall nobility, basically because those arseholes can't stand the idea of being answerable to anyone. But also, like higher values such as separation of church and state. Mostly though, they just don't want to be answerable to anyone. So how has Hawk fared in this situation? Well, he's basically bulletproof. Yes, he's an apostate, but he's also wealthy, connected, and a hero who's basically loved by everyone in the city. His story as a Ferelden refugee living in Lowtown and rising to wealth, fame, and power resonates in the hearts of the common people who all dream of something similar for themselves. It especially hits with the downtrodden Fereldans who see Hawk as one of their own. Meredith has a lot of power and a lot of Templars at her disposal, but she knows that forcing Hawk into the Circle against his will would turn the entire city against her. I'd also like to highlight Grand Cleric Althena here. She is an exemplar of the Chantry, and one of the few rays of hope in all this madness. She's a teacher, not a preacher. She's Sebastian's guide. When his family forced him into the Chantry, she helped him escape, but through gentle guidance, she gave him the chance to come to the Maker on his own terms. This meant that when he finally did come, he did so with a much stronger faith than any that could have been instilled in him with a whip, because it was of his own making. She embodies gentle power, and she can just walk up to this battle-hardened Knight Commander and powerful First Enchanter, shake her head at them like they're just bickering children, tell them she's not mad, just disappointed in them, and they both fall into line and feel terrible about their actions. Too bad she's not willing to step up and take more of a hands-on role here, as she is exactly what this situation needs. Act 3 also sees the climax of all of our companion arcs for better or worse. I don't think things could have gone worse for Merrill, and I was so tempted to save scum my way out of the outcome that I got and try to get something better. But sometimes, you just have to face the consequences of your actions head on. There are no quick saves and reloads in real life after all. Despite 6 years of trying, Merrill has neither made progress with the Illuvian Mirror, nor has she been able to let it go and move on with her life. The sunk cost fallacy is very real here, it seems. So much so, that she's now willing to try something truly insane and consult with a pride demon on what to do. The creature, called Audacity, is imprisoned on Sundermount and claims to have been around all the way back when the mirror was made. It was what showed Merrill how to cleanse her shard of the Darkspawn taint, and started her down the path of blood magic. Now she hopes it'll have some insight into how to get it working. My Hawk and Merrill hooked up after she came to apologise for a big fight over the mirror, and while she still had access to her place in Lowtown, she was basically living with him. Despite understanding this was a terrible idea, years of obsession isn't something you just talk someone out of. So if she was going to do it regardless, I'd prefer she did it with me and the boys around to back her up, rather than by herself. Atop Sundermount we encounter Keeper Marathari. She not only understands her student all too well, but she hasn't been idle on this issue over the past 6 years either. She discovered that Audacity had plans to use the Illuvian Mirror to escape its prison and enter into Merrill. To prevent this from happening, she took the drastic option of releasing the creature and binding it into herself. As we've seen with Justice though, there's only one way this could possibly go, and once she transforms, we have no choice but to destroy her in order to cast the demon back into the Fade. On one hand, I suppose Marathari could have tried talking to Merrill and showing her the evidence of what she'd discovered, but she most likely figured Merrill wouldn't listen regardless at this point, and chose simply to remove the temptation entirely. Of course Merrill is heartbroken. The closest thing she's had to a motherly figure in her life gave up her life to save her from herself. But it only gets worse when the rest of the clan show up to find out what happened to their keeper. From their perspective, their leader and spiritual guide went into a cave with a pariah and known blood mage, and now she's dead. And when I attempted to explain the situation, they attacked, and there was nothing left for it but to wipe them out completely. And that's it for Merrill. Her obsession led to the death of her teacher and the destruction of her entire clan. It's not entirely her fault, of course. Numerous agents made numerous choices to lead to this outcome, but there's no way she can't blame herself for this. Merrill can't look to her past anymore. She can't seek meaning in trying to uncover the forgotten mysteries of her people. Her old family is truly gone, and there's nothing left for her there now. All she can do is set her sights on the future, put one foot in front of the other, and move forward. Hard lessons have been learned, and mistakes have been paid for with blood, and all that's left is to try and do better tomorrow. It's a hell of a dark outcome, and it's one that mirrors that of several other characters too. Fenris also learns that there truly is nothing left for him in his past. In fact, he isn't even the person he thought he was. He finally makes contact with his sister in hope of making some connection with his forgotten past. The meeting, however, quickly goes sour when Daenerys finally rolls up in person to collect his pet back for himself. Fenris' sister had just been bait. However, I genuinely appreciate Daenerys making it so easy for me. I mean, we're the guys who fought off an entire Qunari army and slew an Arishok. I think we can handle one Magister.
You are no longer my master.
With his old master slain, Fenris prepares to turn his vengeance upon his own sister. She begs for forgiveness, pleads that she had no choice, that she'd had nothing but hardship in her life since their mother died, and becoming a Magister was her only ticket out of poverty. Yeah, she's a mage, and Anders has something to say about that.
You bloody hypocrite! You really are just jealous!
I told Fenris to stay his hand. Whatever his rage tells him to do now, he could very well regret it down the line. And his rivalry score was basically maxed out with me by that point anyway, so I had nothing to lose. As a final twist of the knife, his sister tells him that the marks weren't forced upon him, that he fought tooth and nail to earn them, that he might also free his mother and sister in with the deal. So just like Merrill, there are no answers for Fenris in his past, only hard truths and broken hearts. He is his own man now, and with his quest for vengeance fulfilled and his hunters finally beaten, he must focus on his future and who he's going to become. Isabela also settles things up with Castilion. Through an elaborate kidnapping scheme, we lure him out and battle him until he's defeated. Having already shown us that she's a far better person than even she knows, Isabela falls back into her old habits when she attempts to use blackmail to best Castilion rather than simply kill him. She wants his ship and is worried that he'll never come looking for her again. There's just one small issue. Castilion is a slaver who's actually been operating within Kirkwall. Not only is Aveline not going to like that, but I seem to recall it was him trafficking slaves from Ferelden that landed Isabela in this mess in the first place. So it seems she needs saving from herself again. As such, I made a counteroffer that couldn't be refused.
Castillon dies here today, if I have anything to say about it.
Enough with the blackmail then. Let's settle this like civilized people.
Wait!
She'll get over it. Aveline has something of a reunion with her old disgraced guard captain, who's somehow got out of prison and has been spreading rumors about her to try and undermine her authority, showing just how far a man who isn't willing to take responsibility for his own actions and looks to blame everyone else for his problems can fall. I think the more interesting thing, though, is seeing the relationship develop between these two. Aveline and Isabela can seem like complete opposites on the surface, and they butt heads on more than one occasion if you keep them in your party. But here they are in the final act, swapping tales and enjoying each other's company. Far from being rivals, they complement each other, one balancing the other out. This is one of several touching moments that can transpire between any companion whom you've maxed out either friendship or rivalry with. Aveline actually has a chance to return to Ferelden and take up her old position, this time beneath the banner of the King of Cool himself, Alistair, who also shows up for a brief cameo later on. Hold on a second, sir. You look kinda different.
Yes, swooping is bad. That's right. Swooping is bad.
Okay, checks out. However, her relationship with Hawke has helped to solidify her new life in Kirkwall in so many ways, and she considers this to be her home and her life, and is willing to stick through these new trials to the bitter and bloody end too. I love Aveline. She's such a Chad. She starts off in such a terrible place, the betrayal at Ostagar, losing her husband to the Darkspawn, dealing with all the troubles of a Ferelden refugee in Kirkwall, and yet she handles all of it in an emotionally mature and responsible way. She never compromises her morals or values, and she moves forward with her life, choosing to build something new and better, rather than clinging to a past that is full of pain and loss. But most of all, she just cares. She cares for her friends, her guards, her husband, and her people. She's just a good person. And I think a world like Thedas needs all the good people it can get. The closure in Varric's quest concerns yet more Red Lyrium. When he tries to sell Bartrand's old estate, he gets complaints that the place is haunted, and we've got good reason to assume that the veil could be thin in there, allowing the Fade to seep inside. Of course we have to fight yet more waves of shades in there again, but we finally find a shard of the idol, still hidden in the mansion. And when Varric picks it up, it starts doing its One Ring thing on him very quickly. My Hawk told him to snap out of it and give him the shard for disposal. Frankly, there's only one dwarf in all of Thedas I trust with something like this. For Sebastian, we get invited to a covert meeting with the left hand of Divine Justinia to discuss the growing tensions between the Templars and the mages here. The left hand is something like a spy master or intelligence officer. I wonder if we know someone who'd be just perfect for that gig. Huh. So we're not travelling the world together and making passionate love beneath the stars every night. Well, actually, the hero of Ferelden is off doing his own thing, but we'll get to that another day. Leliana doesn't see much hope for this situation, and suggests that Grand Cleric Althena make plans to flee the city. She of course is disgusted at the idea of abandoning her flock to the wolves to save her own skin. Like I said, an exemplar of the Chantry, someone who really believes and practices what she preaches. Speaking of cameos, I'm pretty sure I already mentioned that we bump into Zevron out in the wilds as well. Always so charming. Damn it, I forgot to ask about those massages again. So all in all, things wrap up relatively well for our companions. And I have to say that this really is some of the best character writing I've seen in a BioWare RPG. Mass Effect 2 also does a great job. Being so character focused, it has both recruitment and loyalty quests for the main cast. But with this game taking place over so much time, we really see these guys grow and change. We see their relationships with each other change, as well as their relationships with Hawke. It's so much more than banter on the road. I really feel like I know these people, and that they really know each other. We've all been through the mill together, and come out the other side so much stronger for the beating. We've stared down an army of Qunari, countless blood mages and demons, overzealous Templars abusing their authority, and a maker-damned Elder Dragon together. These are my squad. We stand together. We die together. Boy, it sure would suck if a key member of that squad betrayed me and did something truly unforgivable, even if in their minds they had the best of intentions. And it would suck especially hard if they manipulated me into helping them do that. One thing David Gader wanted to explore was the question of, could the player defend an act of terrorism in a post-9/11 world? Never let anyone tell you that games aren't political or that X Studio has suddenly gone woke. Of course, it's entirely possible that a player wouldn't befriend Anders during their playthrough. Maybe they, or the character they are roleplaying, is strongly opposed to mage freedom and supports the Circle and Templar oversight as a necessary evil for the greater good. A player like that could easily build a strong rivalry with Anders through their actions and dialogue choices, and see his final actions as the ultimate vindication of their distrust for magic. I, however, had played as a mage, an apostate, and I'd come to like Anders a lot. He made a good impression on my warden in Awakening, and when I found him in this game, he was in the poorest part of the city, handing out free healing to people who needed it the most. Anders is, in many ways, an exemplar of what a free mage could be, and shows that magic can be a true force for good that benefits everyone around it. Well, you know, aside from the abomination stuff. Mechanically, he's also your healer, and has several specialized healing talents that no other mages can get. So he's a good member to bring into most situations. For most of the game, he isn't just declaring all Templars are bad and trying to attack them in the street. He specifically goes after those that are abusing their authority and actively harming mages, and he also condemns blood magic and openly fights against demons. He just wants a better world for mages, and he looks up to Hawk for so many reasons. My Hawk had maxed out friendship with Anders. We were allies. I cared about him, which made what happened next hit all the harder. When Anders approached me about a miracle cure for his possession problem, I will say that I had my doubts when he insisted a simple potion, albeit one made of very rare ingredients, was all it would take to separate himself from justice and return the wayward spirit to the Fade. But hey, magic is a broad field. My specialities were blowing things up and paralysis. All I know about demons is demon bad, demon die. Even so, when he asked me to distract the Grand Cleric while he performed unspecified activities within the Chantry, I began to get just a little suspicious. Justice generally made it known when he took the wheel, but it's been 7 years. Who can say what might have changed, or if I was even talking to my friend anymore? So things are getting worse for the mages now. They are locked up almost permanently within the gallows. Far from being a place of learning, it has truly become a prison, and any attempt to escape is met with swift and decisive action from the Templars. Meredith seems to be imagining cabals of blood mages everywhere at this point, and it seems like she could tear the gallows down brick by brick, strip every mage naked and march them into the middle of the city, and still not be satisfied that something wasn't going on. Suffice to say, this is all edging towards another breaking point. Either the mages just wait for it to happen anyway, or someone takes the initiative and does something drastic. Specifically, Maker help us, Anders. What have you done? On one hand, I can see where he's coming from. If the mages are to be condemned anyway, then let it be for a crime that was actually committed, and not one just made up in the mind of the Knight Commander. The current situation isn't going to get better. It's just a slow, compliant march to the executioner's block, as Meredith grows ever bolder in her demands. Soon there will be no more concessions to make. And when even that isn't enough for her, she'll just kill all the mages anyway, just to be sure. So if the mages play ball, they suffer and die anyway, but maybe the history books remember them better for it. But this way, the fires of war are ignited, and they are forced into battle not just for themselves, but for the future of all mages. And if they fight hard enough, they might even etch out a better tomorrow for those who come after. History may remember Anders as the bad guy, or maybe the truth of what the Kirkwall Circle endured to bring them here will come out. No one can possibly know. On the other hand though, he's just murdered the Grand Cleric, someone well loved by everyone in Kirkwall, and a lot of innocent people. He's cast the mages as the aggressors in the conflict, and given Meredith all the reasons she needs to skip straight to the part where she kills all the mages. This is the point of no return. There is no hidden third option where you can talk everyone down, and we all go hand in hand into a new day. It's time to pick a side, and get your hands bloody. According to David Gader, this was actually in response to an issue of one of the quests in the first game. During the Redcliffe mission, you're presented with the choice of using blood magic to rescue the Jarl's son. However, the amount needed would no doubt kill his mother. The other option is to march up to the Ferelden Mages Tower, explain the situation to them, and have them come back with you with a small cart full of lyrium to save the boy that way. The first option is loaded with consequences. The second has no negative side effects at all, despite representing weeks of in-game time passing. Gader didn't want any easy outs in this game, and both sides definitely have their points. Remember, we've been dealing with crazed blood mages and demons all through the game. One of them even killed Hawke's mother, and then turned her into the Bride of Frankenstein. We've met Tevinter Magisters face to face, and seen the casual disregard they have for human life, and how they flaunt demonic powers, without any thought for who could get hurt in the crossfire. These people show exactly why we need a circle and Templars looking over mages' shoulders. But then we've also seen what happens when those Templars abuse their power and authority, and how the circle can be transformed from being a place of learning and safety to an actual prison, where the slightest infraction of the rules can see you tranquiled. We of course see examples of people on both sides who seem to want the system to work, and help not only each other, but other people as well. The takeaway is that the actions of a few can't be used to represent the whole, but on the other hand, one bad mage could inflict suffering on countless lives. Playing an apostate mage, especially one who hadn't resorted to blood magic, I wasn't ready to give up on my people, and I certainly couldn't support the slaughter of the entire circle for the actions of a single apostate. And since I wasn't with Meredith, I was against her. This moment can actually be the breaking point for some party members. Members who are indifferent to you or who have high rivalry will go their own way. In my case, Fenris left the party to side with the Templars, though he wasn't too hard to bring back into line before the final battles.
I thought freedom from slavery meant something to you.
I have changed my mind, human. I will stand with my friend.
As it happens though, I had a much better greatsword guy to sub in for him. So now what? Anders confesses everything and presents himself for our judgment, and oh god, this is tense. Sebastian straight up wants to kill Anders. He was very close to the Grand Cleric, and saw her as a beacon of hope whom Anders had no right to attack for any reason. And he's not exactly wrong about that either. Merrill doesn't agree with what Anders did, but would rather see him begin his redemption arc by helping all the people caught in the crossfire by his actions. Anders isn't ashamed of what he's done, nor does he consider himself under the influence of a demon. In fact, he believes that he and Justice have now completely merged into a new entity. Sort of like how Venom refers to itself and Eddie as we, but Carnage uses I. So is this even my friend anymore? Do I even know this person? Truthfully, I could have spent hours going back and forth with myself on the morality of this, and even now, I don't have a good answer. So I just took the pragmatic route. Anders is a mage and a party regular who's good at healing and crowd control. Sebastian is an archer who I hardly used for the entire game, and I've got a much cooler archer in the party anyway. So that's it. Sebastian, you're out. As in, he leaves the group and returns to Starkhaven to raise an army to take his revenge. Anders, you're with me. Ask an artist, especially a writer, what question do they hear the most, and it'll probably be, where do you get your ideas? The short answer is life experience and skill. Creativity is just as much of a skill as anything else. You practice, you get good. However, art is actually created in a dialogue between the artist and the piece. Random splotches of paint on a canvas can stir something in a great painter, and soon be transformed into the focal point for the whole piece. As the greatest human who ever lived, Bob Ross, always said,
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
It's the same for writers. Once they know who their characters are, it's actually the characters who decide how they're going to react in a certain situation. The writer imposes their will upon them at the story's peril. Stephen King famously took a long hiatus from writing his fantasy magnum opus The Dark Tower, when the protagonist did something completely unexpected in one of the final scenes in the first book, and left King wondering if he even wanted to know where his journey would take him. In collaborative projects such as games and movies though, you have multiple disciplines going back and forth with each other on the same problem, and hopefully, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. Rutger Hauer felt something in the exploration of the character of Roy Batty that wasn't expressed in the original Blade Runner script. So, he penned a small monologue for him to say right before his final moments. The team shot it on a punt, and it became one of, if not the most iconic moment in the whole damn movie.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
In games, the developers come up with interesting mechanics, and writers weave how and why these things work that way into their stories. Level designers can create stunning worlds with great verticality, and then the gameplay guys create a grappling hook for you to fling yourself around it and multiply the fun by 1,000. This kind of collaborative creativity can be an incredible thing. When you don't have publishers like EA looking over your shoulder, telling you that an endless grind looter shooter is a better idea than a story-driven single-player RPG, or giving you just over a year to kick out a game to keep their shareholders happy. The combat team approached Gator about the game's final boss. Because of time restrictions, it was decided that regardless of which side the player chose, Meredith would be the final battle. The problem though, is she was just a human Templar. That's not exactly last boss material. Where's the demon dragon? Where's the fallen god of fire? Where's the storm that is approaching? The nemesis, the big bad. Despite the average Templar's aversion to magic, it was decided to power up Meredith for the fight, and somehow make it work in the story after, without doing massive rewrites to entire chapters of the game. This is how she wound up with the Red Lyrium sword, and I think you can all see how this undermines all of the nuance of the conflict. We've seen what Red Lyrium did to Bartrand, and while Meredith may be mentally tougher, she's clearly heading down the same route. Her whole imagined Blood Mage cabal becomes a symptom of psychosis, and it makes her wrong by default. In Gator's own words, the combat team wanted to make it much bigger than it was, and they didn't like the fact she was just a human Templar. They wanted to superpower her, and I had to drive things much quicker without the extra plots that existed. Push things along, and give her a bunch more reasons to be crazy. I regretted that because the moment she became insane, her argument fell apart. To counter this, Gator decided that the mages weren't going to get away clean either, which is how First Enchanter Orsino winds up doing this.
Meredith expects blood magic, then I will give it to her. Make her help us all.
Again, Gator says, I sat trying to write the dialogue because they literally were waiting to record. And I'm like, this is so shitty, this makes no sense. It was a first draft where the first draft just kind of fell apart. The story had to suffer so that the product could be shipped, the revenue gap filled, and EA executives kept happy. I haven't exactly been subtle about this for the entire video, but EA bad. I suppose we can at least be grateful that they shipped the game with a final boss, instead of patching it in after launch. And so we get an ending. It's an ending in that the story ends. The battle is over and the war has just started. Is it a good ending? It's an ending. The character arcs wrap up, the conflict within Kirkwall is resolved, but the consequences of it are far-reaching. After Kirkwall, more and more circles begin to break rank. Whether because the Chantry tries to come down on them harder overall, or the mages rise up in protest, or choose to escape in fear of retribution, the system falls apart piece by piece. As the Chantry tries to restore order, even their Templars defect, and even form their own factions dedicated to the total eradication of magic within Thedas. Cassandra seems satisfied with Varric's tale at least. She now has a greater understanding of who the Champion of Kirkwall really was, rather than basing her assumptions on tall tales and rumours of some dragon-slaying legendary mage, and his Grey Warden brother who says things like,
"Here they come. Shall I give them a taste of my blade?"
All things considered, I can see why she might think a charismatic hero might help with the current situation. However, he and all his companions have slipped away, and one by one broken off to live their own lives and forge their own destinies going forward. So if someone is actually going to restore order and peace in Ferelden, then it would seem that fate is going to have to find someone new to take up the responsibility. But that is a tale for another time. Dragon Age 2 released to overall lackluster reception from critics and fans alike. Since the full story of the development had yet to surface, the vibe was that this was a cheap cash-in and an unworthy successor to what many still consider one of the best RPGs ever made. There was fallout in BioWare's various social media spaces, with people calling for Mike Laidlaw to lose his job, and as is the case with the internet, even more so now you can make money from a popular tweet, there were also a lot of hate tourists who just wanted to be part of a dog pile. On the surface, it looked like all we got was some basic graphical improvements and not much else. Our epic adventure across an entire nation was replaced with a city that amounted to little more than a few explorable hubs, not that much bigger than Denerim. The dungeons were recycled in a seemingly shameless way. The combat certainly looked nicer, with its flashy animations, but it was boring and grindy. Early battles felt like watching an auto-battler, while later enemies became so spongy that all your powers felt weak, almost like you hadn't spent ages leveling up your characters to be powerhouses capable of slaying elder dragons. In the end, it became more a test of patience than of strategy or resource management. Dragon Age 2 was a game made to fill a revenue gap, and that's exactly what it felt like. And after the incredible success of Origins and Mass Effect 1 and 2, we were all wondering, what the hell happened? I'll give you a hint. Which is a shame because all those faults overshadow what a unique and innovative entry this is into BioWare's library of fantasy RPGs. The recycled dungeons overshadow all the smart and interesting ways that the game makes you revisit the same locations to progress a story over a long period of time. The lack of a giant world to explore overshadowed how tightly focused and intense this story is, and all the unique storytelling devices that a game that takes place over a long period can bring to the table. Writing a story this way gave us some of the best characters in any BioWare game. We spend a lot of time with them. Well, maybe not Sebastian. And each of them grows through their own character arc, either aided or hindered by our protagonist. The relationships we could develop with them could be friendly or adversarial, and both of those roads bring out something different in the companion. These characters feel much more real to me because they have strong opinions and feelings, and the responses I gave to them in our conversations represented me playing my character, rather than me choosing the option that would net me the most affinity points. These guys also have relationships with each other, and they don't always get on. The game's many conflicts are nuanced, and there are no clean-cut answers to any of the problems. Well, anyone who hands Isabela over to the Arashok is about as terrible as anyone who chooses Loghain over Alistair in Origins. But I'm sure none of you would do something like that, right? Right? The story also reminds me somewhat of the Elder Scrolls Oblivion. In both those stories, you aren't the super special chosen one out of whose arse the sun doth shine. You're just a guy who can get things done, and then the bards create your legend for you. Minus the whole becoming the god of madness thing, of course. As mentioned earlier, I feel that the test of time has been kind to Dragon Age 2. Once all the hype had died down, and the hate tourists had found other comment sections to scream in, those left still talking about it could highlight the game's better features, and talk about how disappointing isn't the same as bad. And I'm just one of many players who came back much later with an open mind and discovered the same thing. and it does help that we all have a better understanding of how and why the game got made the way it did, and where exactly to place the blame for that. Dragon Age 2 is a game with a lot of rough edges for sure, but as David Gator said himself, we can't sand those down without losing some of the good edges in the process. Another way to look at it might be to say that Dragon Age 2 was a game made under great pressure, and while many things cracked beneath that pressure, it also produced some very interesting diamonds. So you're probably expecting a Dragon Age Inquisition video next, right? And yes, there is going to be one. I'm currently playing the game. I'm trying to avoid getting too lost in all the side content so that I can actually enjoy the story. And I do plan to finish it and write about it. If you're thinking, surely I've had enough time to finish a whole ass RPG in the time between releasing the Origins video and this one, well, yes. Yes, I have. I just needed a break from Thedas is all, and I wanted to indulge my fetish for getting games running on my PC that have absolutely no business doing so. So that's what we're going to be doing next. Sorry, Inquisitors. We will get to you, I promise. But in the meantime, I would suggest locking your doors, turning out all the lights, hiding in the darkest corners of your homes, and hoping to all gods that may care that no one comes knocking at your door. Hope you've got your things together, and I hope you are quite prepared to die, because it looks like we're in for nasty weather. As on the night of the hunt, one eye is taken for an eye. So don't go around tonight, because it's bound to take your life. Over in Yharnam, there's a bad moon on the rise. Hey everyone, welcome to the end of the video. I'm not sure why you would possibly want more after over 3 hours of me, but I'll say thank you for making it all the way here. Damn, we're already into the 5th month of the year, and I've only got 2 out. I hope the algorithm doesn't decide that I've abandoned my channel. You can help out with a like and a comment if you'd be so kind. If you're not sure what to say, then just leave a Team Templars or Team Mages in the comments, depending on your allegiance. Or just tell me your favorite 360 PS3 era game. Who knows? Maybe I'll make a video about it. Anyway, that's another one down. Thanks again for making it all the way here with me. Socials and tip jars are linked down below, and now I really need to get away from my computer, because I'm very much in need of a long walk through some Japanese mountains. See you in the next one.